Okay, Chair, we're now live.
Thank you. Welcome to this virtual planning control committee that has been being concluded with members and officers at various locations communicating across audio, video and online. There is also an opportunity for the public, the press to listen and view the proceedings via YouTube. Thank you. Welcome to this virtual planning control committee.
If everybody who has any other items in the background, turn those to mute, please, and also mute yourself, please.
I honestly think that was me, actually. I had a link to the YouTube.
Yeah, there's a slight delay, so.
Yeah. So as this is our first, I'll continue then. The first glitch is me. As this is the first virtual planning meeting for the first time using Zoom, please be guided by the officer and be patient. Things may take longer than normal. Before the meeting starts, I'd like to invite committee member and scrutiny officer to explain how the proceedings will work and to confirm that members, officers and registered speakers are in attendance.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members, officers and registered speakers. I'm just going to undertake a roll call. Councillor Tyler.
Present.
Councillor Allen.
Present.
Councillor Brown.
Present.
Councillor Bryant. Yeah.
Wow.
Present. Present.
Councillor Derbyshire.
Present.
Councillor Houston.
Present.
Councillor Hunter. Councillor Hunter.
I think you're on mute, Councillor. I'm going to unmute you. There you go.
It's off now. Present.
Thank you. Councillor Levitt.
Yeah, well, hang on a moment. Let me just
Councillor Levitt.
That's Councillor Levitt, isn't it?
I can see him, so yeah. Councillor Mantle.
Present.
Councillor Moody.
At present.
Councillor Nguala.
Present.
Councillor Prendergast.
Present.
Councillor Rice. Councillor Rice.
Present.
Councillor Weeks.
Present.
Councillor Tart.
Councillor Tart's not here as a committee member, but
Okay, thank you. And then I'll go through the officers now. So Simon Ellis.
Present.
Richard Tiffin.
Present.
Tom Ray.
you might be on mute, Tom.
Present.
Nurinetta.
Present.
Hilary Deneen.
Present.
Melanie Stimpson.
Present.
Thank you. And now I'll just go through the public. Amy Cannon.
Present.
Tom Brindley.
Present.
Simon Hoskin.
Present.
Kane Rowley.
Present.
And Adam Sapper.
Present.
Thank you. The only ones missing are Councillor Shanley and Councillor Tart is here to speak as a member advocate.
I've got my audio back as well now. So.
Thank you, Councillor Levitt. So I'll just now go through the proceedings. The meeting is being streamed live on the Council's YouTube channel. If live streaming fails, the meeting will adjourn. If the live stream cannot be restored within a reasonable period, then the remaining business will be considered at a time and date fixed by the Chair. If the Chair does not fix a date, the remaining business will be considered at the next ordinary meeting. If for any reason the meeting is not quorate, an officer will notify attendees by interjecting the meeting. The meeting will adjourn immediately. Once the meeting is quorate, the meeting will resume. If connection cannot be restored within a reasonable period, then the remaining business will be considered at a time and date fixed by the chair. If the chair does not fix the date, the remaining business will be considered at the next ordinary meeting. Only members present for the entire debate and consideration of an item are entitled to vote. If technology fails for a member during the debate and rejoins the meeting, they will not be able to vote on that item. If technology fails for a member of the public who intends to exercise their right to speak and is unable to do so, the chair may decide to proceed to the next item of business or to allow for connection to be re-established. If connection cannot be restored within a reasonable period, the chair can decide to conclude the remaining business or consider the remaining business at a time and date fixed by the chair. If the chair does not fix the date, the remaining business will be considered at the next ordinary meeting. Please ensure that your electronic devices are muted, and please activate the mute button on your tablet or your computer when you're not speaking. You'll be invited to address the Planning Control Committee by the chair. If a member wishes to speak, they should use the raise hand button located under participants, and this will alert the host that you wish to speak. The host will inform the chair of the names of the speakers who should wait to be invited by the chair to address the Planning Control Committee. Please do not use the reactions hand symbol. Please can I remind you that the normal procedure rules in respect of debate and time to speak will apply. If any of the officers need to address the Planning Control Committee at any point during proceedings, please may I request that you respectfully interject and await a response before addressing the chair. When satisfied that there has been sufficient debate, the chair will request that the relevant planning officer read out the recommendation that members will be voting upon. When requested to vote, voting will be via the raise hand function, which is located under participants at the bottom of the screen. There will be three elements to a vote. Firstly, those members who wish to vote for the recommendation will be asked to use the raise hand function. Following which, members who wish to vote against the recommendation will be asked to use the raise hand, and finally, members who wish to abstain will be asked to use the raise hand button. Please do not lower your hand until requested to do so. The clerk will confirm the names of members voting at each stage. Details of how members voted will not be kept or minuted unless a recorded vote was requested or an individual requests that their vote be recorded, although this will be heard on the audio and YouTube recordings of the meeting. The committee member and scrutiny officer will clearly state the result of the vote, and the chair will proceed to the next agenda item. In the event of a tied vote, the chair will have the casting vote. Are there any questions before we start the meeting? Okay, thank you. I'll now hand back to the chair of the committee, Councillor Tyler.
Thank you, Matthew. First order of business is apologies for absence. We have none at this point. Is that still true?
That's correct, Councillor Tyler.
Thank you. Notification of any other business is none. My announcements, Chairman's announcements, audio recording in accordance with Planning Control Committee policy. This meeting is being audio recorded as well as YouTube streamed, as well as being filmed. The audio recordings are available on ModGov and the film recording via the NHDC YouTube channel. Okay, declarations of interest. Members are reminded to make declarations of interest before an item. The detailed reminder about this and speakers' rights are set out under Chairman's announcements on the agenda. 3, clarifying matters for the registered speakers. Members of the public have 5 minutes for each group of speakers, i.e. 5 minutes for objectors, 5 minutes for supporters. This 5 minutes time limit also applies to member advocates as well. A bell will sound at 4.5 minutes to alert you that you have 30 seconds left. At 5 minutes, a bell will sound again to signify the speaker must cease speaking. Tonight we have I believe it is the last of the clap for carers on the NHS. So at 8 o'clock, what we'll do is actually stop at 8 o'clock, and what I'm asking everybody to do is just leave the cells logged on, and we'll do the clap for the carers, and after 5 minutes or maybe less, we'll go back to the meeting and we'll all be logged on. So there's don't log out of of your Zoom at 8 o'clock. Leave it logged in and then live. If you wish to take, therefore, if you wish to take part, you're welcome to leave your camera and microphone on, and we can all clap together. Public participation. We have 5 registered speakers already been confirmed, and this is present and are present during the roll call. We have 2 member advocates, Councillor Kate Hart and Councillor Ian Moody. Okay, that's the announcements. So to the first planning application, which is item number 5 on the agendas, which is Anglian Business Park, Orchard Road, Royston, Hertfordshire, SG8 5TW. Hybrid application for a residential development of an Angular Business Park to provide a total of up to 67 dwellings. There's various other items here, but what I'm going to do is ask Richard Tiffin to present the item and any updates that there may be on this particular application, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, there's the normal corrections and updates, and I'll run through those first. Corrections to the report. A fairly simple one at 4313 in your on your report. The sentence should be "it would be satisfactory," so there's a B missing out just for completeness. At 4.4.1 of your report, I've reworded that for clarity, and the rewording is as follows: that permission be granted in detail for phase 1 and in outline for phases 2 and 3. Note, most conditions apply to the detailed permission for 28 units, phase 1. Conditions will be identified as applying to either the detailed or the outline permission. No designation identifies conditions as applying to both. Condition 16 has been amended to include an additional sentence after as follows: these details are also to include the specification of the proposed bin stores. So that's condition, I think that's condition, yes, that's condition 16. And finally, on the conditions, there's an error in condition 23. It should cite condition 22, not itself. So at the moment it refers to itself, 23, it should read 22, which is the preceding condition. Moving on to informatives, I've added another informative. There's quite a lot already, but I've added another one. And this informative is entitled Design of Subsequent Phases. This will read as follows: it should be noted that the Council considers that the design of subsequent phases approved in outline must be predicated on the applicant's overall objective of greening the site. Accordingly, the figure of 39 units is an upper quantum and should be regarded as subordinate to the aforementioned design objective. The report is, as other than those corrections and amendments, the report is as before you. Happy to take any questions.
Do you want this plan up?
Sorry, Hilary, I'm assuming I now go to the presentation.
Which I'm just bringing up for you.
Thank you, Hilary. So if you can, yes, thank you, Hilary. If you could move on 2 slides, please. Thank you. This is the site. It's a local plan site, a housing site. Members will, who know the area, will be familiar with it. The application site you'll see is the area to the south adjacent to the application site for the detailed permission is the area to the south adjacent to the railway. Next slide, please. This is a photograph taken at the back of the site looking west towards thermal engineering. Don't worry, we can revisit these. These are just photographs of the site, so I'll explain them as we're going through, but they'll make more sense when you see the layout and drawings. Next slide, please. This is a view looking out of the site, back up towards Orchard Road, although you can't see Orchard Road because of the dogleg. And the existing residential scheme at Braben Walk is to your right. Next slide, please. This is a view looking in, and the dogleg precludes vision of the site, but you can see the business units that currently exist. Next slide, please. This is a view looking south towards the railway. You can see the electrification in the centre. You can see the electrification pylons for the railway. This is a view of the site. This would be, just bear this in mind, this would be a view of Block 1 as developed, and the existing residential scheme at Braben Walk is to your left. Next slide, please. This is a view out onto Orchard Road. This would be the view from subsequent phases, not the phase that's before you in detail tonight, but from the outline phase 2 and 3. And this is looking west along Orchard Road, and Johnson Matthey is opposite. Next slide, please. Again, I've switched back. I'll go back to Orchard Road in a minute, but this is another view looking towards the railway, and this view would be, post-development would be Block 2. Next slide, please.
Oh, sorry, don't know how to go back now. Hang on.
Yes, 10's the next one, that's right.
Okay, I'll try and make it full screen again.
Anyway, while you're doing that, Hilary, that's a view. Oh, that's not a view of anything.
That one?
Yeah, that's the one. That's a view. Back to the one before, Hilary, please.
Okay. Previous. Okay.
That's a view looking east from the access to phases 2 and 3 along Orchard Road, with again Johnson Matthey, the Johnson Matthey Complex headquarters building opposite. Next slide, please. This is a view from the car park, and again, this will become more apparent when we look at the site plan. But this is a view from the Braben Walk car park to the proposed car park for phase 1. Next slide, please. This is an elevation of the existing residential development along in Braben Walk that runs parallel to the access road serving the site. Next slide, please. And that's a rather poor photograph, but it shows the other block in Braben Walk that abuts the car park. And again, this will be relevant when we're discussing particularly the pedestrian access issue from the proposed scheme. Next slide, please. This is the master plan. This shows phases 1, 2, and 3 from the right. So on the right-hand side of the site plan is phase 1, which you're considering in detail tonight, showing the 2 flatted blocks, the play area, and the car parking and landscaping. And in the middle is phase 2, and towards the end is phase 3. The road alignment will stay as it is now. Phases 2 and 3 are the application is in outline for those before you. Next slide, please, Hilary. This is phase 1 in isolation, and you can see the 2 blocks that are proposed. And you might note now at the top of your site plan is an outline of the residential development in Grays, and an outline of the residential development off Braben Walk. And the area to the right of that is the car park that the photographs were, that I took the photographs of and showed you earlier. So that's the area of the Braben Walk car park. Next slide, please. This is block 1. And so the front elevation would be facing you as you drive into the scheme from Orchard Road. Next slide, please. And this is a street scene. You will note on the left-hand side, on the extreme left-hand side, the existing development in Braben Walk. I would invite you to note the height of the building of block 1. Block 1 is straight ahead, block 2 is to the right-hand side. Note the relative difference in height between block 1 and the existing residential development. The height of the block 1 is something just over 12 metres, and I would estimate that the height of the existing building in Braben Walk is about 10 metres. So there's something in the order of a 2 metre difference in height, but you can see the relative difference on that section. Next slide, please. This is, I did have some concerns, and no doubt this will come up in discussion, but I did have some concerns about privacy in the relationship between the block or block 1 as proposed and the residential development in Braben Walk. And you will see the architect has done some sight lines. Important to note, the distance between the 2 existing blocks is less than, at 11.5 metres, is less than any of the relationships that would exist between the proposed development block 1 and Braben and the development on Braben Walk. Next slide, please. That's it. And so that's the presentation concluded, and I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Richard.
At this point, we'll move on to registered speakers. May I invite Mr. Kane Rowley to speak in an objection to this application, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee. I've been asked to raise the objection to this application on behalf of the directors of Orchard Grange Management Company. Orchard Grange, as referred to in the presentation, is the neighbouring residential development comprising of 136 dwellings, primarily on Braben Walk in Reflection, and Orchard Grange Management Company represents those residents. So our primary concern is the increased traffic on Orchard Road, both during the phased build and demolition programme and subsequently from the 67 dwellings with a proposal of 112 car parking spaces. So during peak non-COVID times, it can already take us 10 to 15 minutes to exit Orchard Grange onto Orchard Road due to parked cars causing traffic to come single file, as was shown in the photos in the presentation. Pulling out onto Orchard Road is made more difficult due to poor visibility and heavy goods vehicles. The addition of more delivery lorries and equipment during this build and the additional residential post-completion will compound our issues, not only just for Orchard Grange, but all local residents. We also have concerns for disruption caused to our local residents, including connection to the electricity substation that's situated in the middle of Orchard Grange. Whilst it wasn't clear from that presentation whether works are required to enhance this substation to power the additional homes, if works are required, then consideration needs to be given to our residents and damage caused to our private estate. Finally, concerns were raised that a play area is proposed to be on our boundary, noise from this play area will affect our residents as it is directly overlooked by those 24 apartments. Sightlines were shown in the presentation between flats, but some of those flats will also have visibility over that play area. We feel that if consent is granted, then consideration should be given to relocating that play area to the opposing boundary of the site, as that is shared with a 24/7 operational industrial unit or a suitable acoustic barrier installed. Also, with regards to the sightlines, our existing block is adjacent to, so 1 to 6 Braeburn is adjacent to 7 to 12 Braeburn, whereas block 1 would have direct sightline into 7 to 12 Braeburn. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Rowley. Would any of the committee members like to pose a question to Mr. Rowley?
You have councillors Brown and councillors Weeks.
Call upon Councillor Brown to speak first.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify the issues with exiting the Orchard Grange estate. Are they primarily relating to parked cars opposite Charding Crescent?
That certainly is one of our issues, yes. But also, during the peak times, there's a lot of industrial traffic coming down. So it is slightly better when there are no cars parked opposite, but it is still an issue all the time.
Okay, it's just that there is a plan to put double yellows on that piece, so people won't be able to park anymore. But I understand that there'll still be traffic flows, but it should.
Ruth, you've been muted, and Ruth.
Oh, I was just going to say that there is a plan to put double yellow lines opposite the exit from the Orchard Grange estate, so there won't be anybody parking there. So that will remove part of the problem, at least.
Thank you, Ruth. And who was the next councillor?
Councillor Weeks indicated, Chair.
I can't see his hand raised. Okay, Councillor Weeks, then please pose your question.
Councillor, you're muted. Councillor, let's.
Is that better?
There you go.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Just for avoidance of doubt, this is a hybrid application in 3 parts, isn't it? All we're talking about here tonight is the most southerly part, yeah, which in essence is 2 blocks. Is that correct? Hello?
Yes.
It is, right, okay.
Chairman, through you, could I answer that more fully?
Yes, of course. Please proceed.
You are considering an outline and a detailed permission, Councillor Weeks. So it isn't true that you're just considering phase 1. You're considering phase 1 in detail and phases 2 and 3 as a matter of principle up to 39 dwellings. Is that clear?
Okay, it is now. Yes, thank you very much, Richard. The land is all around there is more or less industrial, and I guess that originally this was earmarked for industrial development. Was there ever an application to change it to housing? I know it's in a local plan, but was there ever a change of use?
Councillor Weeks, I don't believe that the gentleman will be able to answer that question. That sounds more like a question for the planning officer.
I thought I was
Yes.
talking to the planning officer.
Yeah, Richard, to that. Thank you, Daniel. Yes.
Well, I think it is 8 o'clock on that. No, I've just heard a firework go off. So over to you, Chair, and I'll answer it afterwards.
Can I?
Yep.
Hello? Can I carry on?
Terry, you're muted. Councillor Tyler, you're muted.
Yes.
Hello?
Councillor Tyler, you're muted. Everybody.
Please keep yourself logged on, and we'll be back in a few minutes. And please it's okay if you wish to clap and say stuff on while we're doing the NHS clap.
Unmute.
Okay, can I invite everybody back to the meeting?
Hello, Chair.
Yes.
It's Richard. Did you want me to answer Councillor Weeks' question now, or I think it is a question for the debate, because we're still listening to speakers, but obviously it's your call.
I think because it's something we left on a cliffhanger with the. It would be nice to address it now.
Okay. This
Hang
is
on, excuse me, we're still missing Councillor Rice. So it's up to you, Chair, whether you go ahead then or not.
No, we'll wait a second, but Richard will answer Councillor Weeks' question once we are fully reconvened.
Chair, after that question, I still have two others as well, if I may.
Yeah, so I mean, we're allowed 5, aren't we? Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely.
Councillor Rice is back. I believe everyone's back in their seat. Thank you.
Welcome back, everybody. We left with Richard about to answer a question from Councillor Weeks. So, Richard, if you could answer that question, and I also believe that Councillor Weeks has got 2 follow-up questions. He just informed me as well.
Yes, the site has not been the subject of a planning application for residential development because, as Councillor Weeks correctly observes, it's been an industrial site for some years. It's its inclusion as a housing site in the local plan which has precipitated this application.
Okay.
Thank you, Richard.
Next question.
The Weeks.
The 2 blocks, are they to be entirely affordable housing? Do we know?
No, they're not.
They're not, but an element of them will be.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. And finally, the planning officer, please, can he comment on the suggestion that this is overdevelopment?
Overdevelopment is an oft-used term, Councillor Weeks, that has precisely no meaning unless it's defined. It could be you could have something, you could have land that's overdeveloped because the gardens are too small, there's not enough car parking, the buildings are too big in relation to their surroundings. So it has to be precisely defined. As members will know, the National Planning Policy Framework urges authorities to consider the making maximum use or best use or optimum use of land. And to do that, we have to get close to overdevelopment, but not cross the line. It's a matter of judgment. My view is that this site is developed at an optimum capacity.
Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Councillor Weeks. I have, although we've just had 5 questions, I've got Councillor Hunter with his hand up, and also our legal advisor, Nureta, has got a hand up. Do you wish to speak?
Chair, you've also got Councillor Allen.
And Councillor Abbott, his hand's been up.
Mine's a point of order, Chairman, if it helps.
Yes, please.
Quite simply, have we still got the applicants sitting there waiting to be asked questions while we've suddenly leaped in to asking the planning officer questions in the debate?
Yes, you're right. Yes.
We've gone off track, Chairman.
Trying to clarify those questions. Thank you, though. Thank you. Right. Yes, let's move on then. We've got a supporter.
No, Chair, we do need to have the questions because there haven't been the right number of questions, and you do have other people waiting.
We have had 5 questions, I think I've counted.
Not of Kane Rowley, we haven't. We've only actually had 1 question to him. The other questions were to the Principal Planning Officer.
Good point, actually. Good point. Yes. Councillor Allen, have you got a question?
No, I was bringing up the same point of order as Councillor.
Okay. Right. Are there any other questions for Mr. Rowley directly? I've got no hands up apart from our legal advisor.
Oh, sorry. It was just to point out what Councillor Hunter beat me to point out that the point of order was that Councillor was asking the planning officer the questions rather than the applicant, rather than the objector. And this point, it's for questions of clarification on the speakers' presentations.
Good point taken as well. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Rowley? I can't see hands up on my screen. Is there any on our officers' screens?
No, Chair.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mr. Rowley. I'm sorry about the slight diversion there. My colleagues have rightly pointed out the error of my ways. Hopefully you forgive us on that one, and thank you very much for your input.
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, we'll move on to a supporter speaker. Please may I invite Mr. Simon Hoskins, JB Planning Associates, to speak in support of the application. You have 5 minutes, as every speaker does, and you will hear a warning at 4.5 if need be.
Thank you, Chair, for allowing me to address the committee. My name is Simon Hoskin, and I'm the agent for the applicant James Property Investments LLP. I support your officer's recommendation of approval. The site has been allocated for residential development in your emerging local plan and is referred to as site RY7. The advice contained within paragraph 48 of the National Planning Policy Framework is that weight should be afforded to the emerging local plan policies, especially given the advanced stage of its preparation. The site is allocated as being one of only few sites available within Royston that is suitable for residential development and occupying previously developed land. It is also within a sustainable location which is close to the station, shopping facilities and the town centre. The site is divided into 2 parts. The northern part comprises 4 business units. The southern part towards the railway line comprises vacant land immediately available for development. In order to bring forward an early residential scheme, the application has been submitted as a hybrid, as agreed with your officers. This allows a fully detailed scheme for the vacant southern portion of the site, referred to within the application as phase 1, and an outline proposal for the northern part of the site, referred to as phases 2 and 3. This approach allows the opportunity to provide new homes in the first phase, whilst allowing the existing commercial units to continue to be occupied until their leases expire or are surrendered early through negotiation with the applicant or through exercising break clauses. We have worked positively with officers both at the pre-application stage and during the course of the application. The proposed layout and design of the new flats has been carefully considered to achieve a high quality development. 2 blocks are proposed in phase 1, each containing 14 new flats. In developing the scheme, care has been taken to ensure that the amenities of neighbouring residential properties to the east are protected, and also that there will be no detrimental impact on the use of the neighbouring commercial premises to the west, and that future residents will be protected from any noise generated by the use. In terms of scale, the new blocks respect the neighbouring development to the east and will not appear dominant in this setting, as can be seen on the street scene section submitted with the application, which Richard Tiffin kindly presented earlier. The proposed blocks adopt a contemporary design with references to vernacular domestic materials, including the use of buff bricks. They will remain compatible with the surrounding context, which comprises a mix of residential and industrial buildings. The detailed layout for the southern phase 1 area also allows for the early provision of a children's play space area and new landscaping as requested by officers. Amendments have also been made during the course of the application. For example, provision for electric vehicle charging and mobility scooter storage, again in response to discussions with your case officer. The scheme provides appropriate levels of car and cycle parking, taking into account the site's location within a short walk of the railway station and the town centre. There's also a bus route along Orchard Road. The hybrid planning application therefore allows the phase 1 flats to be developed in full detail. An indicative layout for the remaining parts of the site is submitted in outline, so the plans show how the whole scheme might be completed. Full details of the design of this area can be determined at the reserve matters stage. This hybrid planning application therefore enables the committee to see how the whole site can be redeveloped in accordance with the new local plan RY7 residential allocation. Subject to your approval, it will allow the applicant to progress the development of the vacant urban land to the south without delay. The proposal will help make a useful contribution to meeting housing needs within the town and would meet the objectives of the National Planning Policy Framework. The committee will be aware that the NPPF places a strong emphasis on reusing and making an efficient use of brownfield land, stating that planning decisions should give substantial weight to the value of using brownfield land within settlements for new homes. This is especially important as we understand that the council presently has only 1.3 years left of deliverable housing sites. We have worked closely with the councils and the county council's officers in preparing a Section 106 agreement. This will provide financial contributions towards local facilities and infrastructure, including a contribution towards the provision of new cycle shelters in the town centre, as requested by the town council. The Section 106 agreement also provides for 30% of the new dwellings on site to be affordable housing, and all of the affordable units will be within the rented tenure, helping to meet local housing needs. The affordable housing provision has been agreed following detailed discussions with officers, including your housing officer and the appointed viability consultants. The scheme viability factors in the additional costs of ground remediation from previous contaminative uses. So for these reasons, Chair, we fully support your officer's recommendation of approval, subject to the Section 106 agreement and planning conditions. Lastly, the planning officer has discussed with us the possibility of creating a pedestrian link between the application site and the Braven Walk development. The applicant has no objection in principle to this, should
Chair,
this
that's
be
5
necessary
minutes.
and justifiable on planning grounds. However, it is our view that this would not provide any real benefit for the occupiers of these developments. Thank you for allowing me to address the committee.
How much you've gone over 5 minutes, Mr. Hoskins? How much you got left?
I've finished. Thank you.
Oh, you have? Sorry.
Yes, just about. Yeah, just in time.
Sorry. Okay, that's brilliant. Committee members, have we got any questions for Mr. Hoskins? Councillor Nguala?
You're muted, Councillor.
Apologies.
Yeah.
Hello. Yes, I wondered, Simon, if you could tell us how many of the flats will be for social housing. So you mentioned some that will be rented, put up for rent, but how many will be social housing?
So all of the affordable housing units to be provided on the site will be within the affordable rented tenure.
Councillor Allen?
My apologies. Soakaway. I'm a little bit curious about the fact that all the soakaways have to go into uncontaminated soil, and it would appear that most of the land there is under a contamination worry. Can you let me know a little bit more about the drainage and the problems with the drainage and the existing issues with the ground?
Yes, so thank you, Councillor. Yes, this site was formerly used as a farm fertiliser or a manure processing place, I understand, before the current industrial units were put there. So there is some contamination within the ground, which the application is actually accompanied by an assessment which has looked into that. A detailed drainage scheme has also been put together and accompanies the planning application for surface water management, and puts forward a high-level strategic plan for that. Details of that plan, the finer details, have to be agreed with the lead local flood authority, which is Hertfordshire County Council in this case, and I believe there's a condition attached to the permission which requires the submission of those details, and under that process, that the contamination can be looked at and made sure that there will be no issues in that regard. I also understand that I think there's a condition attached to the permission in relation to foundation design, just again in relation to potential pathways to the receptors, as they call them. So, making sure that there'll be no issues there with contamination going into groundwater.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hoskins. Councillor Hunter.
Thank you, Chairman. Quite a simple question, Mr. Hoskins. The objector has some concern about electricity and a substation, and I am aware that Councillor Matthew at an earlier time had to put in the new substation to meet their requirements. I wondered whether or not you could ease the residents' mind whether any work was going to be done on the substation. Thank you.
Thank you. It's not something that I've personally had any discussions about, and that would be something that we would obviously have to look in at once, subject to planning permission being granted, if it is. Yeah, that's something that we would have to take up with the utility suppliers and potentially address at the construction phase.
Thank you. Councillor Brown.
Hello, just as you were running out of time, you mentioned something about footpaths. I'm really concerned about permeability through sites because it affects whether people walk or whether they get in their cars. Obviously, a lot of people are likely to be commuting to the station from here, and it'd be great if they could go through the existing Orchard Grange site rather than along Orchard Road. So can you comment on the permeability in terms of, will there be footpath connection through that site to avoid people having to go out onto the main road, particularly when they're all going to school, when they've got small children, for example? It's much safer.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. This was mentioned recently in recent discussions with between myself and Richard Tiffin, the planning officer. What I can say on this is that the applicant has no objection in principle to providing a link through to the Braben Walk development. There are the opportunities to provide that link are fairly limited. We've had a kind of initial look at that. The southeastern corner of the site, where potentially there could be a link, it's fairly limited, the opportunities, because there's a continuous run of parking spaces within the Braben Walk side and quite a narrow existing path where you'd have to remove some vegetation. I don't think the people within Braben Walk would want people passing between the narrow gaps between the cars for potential for scratches and things like that. So that's kind of, it's fairly limited at that end. There is potentially an option to link through a bit further north between, there's a gap within the blocks. And I actually understand that when the plans were drawn up for the Braben Walk development, that was actually intended to be a link, but it obviously hasn't come to fruition for some reason. But that would indicate potentially that there isn't a great desire there. But as I say, we have no objection in principle, assuming that that there's strong planning grounds to justify that, and it's not going to pose any security risk. In terms of the benefit that would provide, it would obviously increase permeability, but for the people that occupy the phase 1 area, the existing road has got footways either side and provides quite a direct route northwards up to Orchard Road. So they could kind of get to Orchard Road fairly easily and then travel eastwards. Whereas if they go through Braeburn Walk, it's probably not too much difference in terms of the actual distance that would be saved. It would be a bit more of a convoluted route as well around the blocks. So we're not entirely convinced that the need is there, and but as I say, it's something that we wouldn't object to in principle. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you very much. It does. Am I allowed a second question or not?
You are, because we've only had 4 questions.
Is there anyone else
seeking to speak?
Is there anyone else waiting though?
No, they're not.
Okay. So my second question is, I really welcome the fact that you've got purpose-built bike storage. I wondered how many bikes you could fit in those.
Okay, so there's 2 stores for the phase 1, one adjacent to each block, which have been sited carefully so that they're convenient for the users, fairly close to the blocks, and have got they'll be surveyed naturally from the existing windows and car park areas. Sorry, the proposed windows of the blocks. They will both accommodate a minimum of 20 cycles, so they would use a double racking system. And so that would be 40 in total for the 28 units. And just in addition to that, I don't know if you picked up on in my speech that the applicant has agreed a financial contribution as well to cycle parking provision within the town centre, which was something that was requested by Royston Town Council.
Yeah, I'm actually well aware of that. I'm also a town councillor, Royston Town Council, so I'm well aware of that. And I welcome it. Thank you very much. That answers my question. So there are 40 for 28 units.
That's correct, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hoskins. That's all we need at the moment. Thank you for your input and letting us know what all the details. We need to move on now. So thank you very much. What I'd like to do is invite Richard Tiffin to respond to any issues that have been raised if we haven't already answered them.
Thank you, Chair. I'm still here. Yes, the two issues are, first of all, Mr. Rowley's point about the play area. Play areas should be located where there is good surveillance. They shouldn't be pushed as a matter of general planning principle. They shouldn't be put in areas where there is poor surveillance. So in my view, the play area is where it should be, so that it enjoys natural surveillance from the development. On the point that Mr. Hoskins was talking about to Councillor Brown in relation to the Hilary, is it possible to go back to the slides, because I think it's probably an appropriate time to just explore that issue about pedestrian permeability into Braeburn Walk.
Yeah, please do.
Can we go back to the slides? Yes, I've got the slides up. Can you go down? Just keep going down and I'll tell you when to stop.
Hang on.
Stop. That one, actually, that one's the best one.
That one or that one? That one.
This, yeah. Back one. That's the one. This is the boundary between the car park that serves Braeburn Walk and the development site. As Mr. Hoskins pointed out, the opportunities for a breakthrough here are limited because you'd have to come through vehicles. You'd have to negotiate vehicles. If you go back a slide, Hilary, please. Sorry, forward. Yeah, back a slide. Yeah, the other way. That's it. Looking at this, this is the Braeburn Walk car park. The site boundaries to the left If members can see a little single-story building on the left-hand side beyond the hedge, there is a small gap there where you could break through, and it's near the play area that's shown on the development site. The only problem with breaking through there is you'd have members of the public in close proximity to ground floor windows of properties in Braben Walk. And I'm fairly certain that Mr. Rowley wouldn't approve of that. And I don't, as a matter of fact, I don't think that makes any sense in planning terms. Breaking through elsewhere into the car park, as I've said, would be difficult because pedestrians and even cyclists would have to negotiate parked vehicles. And the other concern I have, and this is often something that we struggle with, is if we consulted the police architectural liaison officer, he would probably take a dim view of a pedestrian access. And it's a constant tension between increasing permeability and safety and security. The police will often see these routes as a getaway. Sometimes they are, sometimes they're not, and planning officers have to take a view on that. But I certainly think a pedestrian access in this area of the site is not viable and not desirable. So I would agree with Mr. Hoskins on that point. There is, as Mr. Hoskins mentioned, an established path. If we could go back, I'm not even sure where we are, Hilary. If you could go back to the drawings. So we've got a site plan. I think you go forward. Yeah, that will do. That's perfect. That one. If members note, you can see the existing residential development off Braben Walk in grey at the top of the site, and there is a gap. It's 2/3 of the way along the phase 2 area. That is, as Mr. Hoskins points out, that is a footway up to the boundary, and it was intended to break through into the industrial area. Why that never happened, I don't know, but there probably wasn't any desire to do that. And again, I agree with Mr. Hoskins in that regard. However, there's nothing to stop us exploring that as an option for pedestrian permeability in dealing with the reserve matters schemes on phases 2 and 3. That's the appropriate time, I think, to explore it. And it may be that we would have to, the applicant would have to have discussions with the management company, who Mr. Rowley represents. They may well express a view that they don't want a pedestrian access there, but I think that's a discussion that can be had when we entertain the reserve matters application. And if members were minded that be something to be explored in later phases, we could add an informative to keep that to the front of people's minds when the reserve matters application comes in. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. We'll now move on to debate. All the members, council members who wish to speak or wish to debate, please raise your hands. Councillor Brown.
Actually, I just had one more question for the planning officer. Can I do that?
Sure, yes. Okay.
Yeah. The Royston Town Council objected to this application, and one of their objections was to do with the phased development. And they were very concerned about that. I wondered, so I noticed in your report it talks about the reason for developing it in phases is the commercial units are still running at the moment and they have a lease that runs out. Could you tell us when that lease is likely to run out? Because I notice you're quite keen to condition it so that the second and third phases have to be built. How long is that? Is it till those leases run out?
Richard?
Thank you, Chair, through you. Thank you for the question, Councillor Brown. Yes, I've never dealt with a hybrid application before of this type, and it is somewhat unusual, although I can quite see why the developer applicant might want to approach the the problem of developing the site in this way. It makes perfect sense. My concern, and it's a concern that I articulate in the report, is that what we don't want to happen is we don't, as a planning authority, we want this site delivered in a timely fashion with housing. So we don't want to approve a detailed permission for housing on phase 1, only to have the owner of the site or applicant then decide that they don't want to remove the commercial development on phases 2 and 3. So we have a part development. We can't stop, other than refusing planning permission. I'm not supporting that. We can't ensure this with a high degree of certainty, but what we can do is we can condition that an application is made for the reserved matters before first occupancy of the flatted scheme before us tonight. And if you note, that's the last condition on the report. That requires the applicant to show, and applications, as you may appreciate, are expensive things to submit because of all the studies and surveys and assessments that need to be done. So, and the applicant's quite happy. So I'll get to your point about leases in a minute, Councillor Brown, but just to give you some context. So with that condition, I'm quite happy that the applicant would be showing serious intent to finish the development and deliver the housing in accordance with the allocation, because they've accepted a condition which requires submission of reserved matters before first occupation. So that's just the context. In terms of the leases, I did ask the applicant and they were quite happy to furnish the details. There are 4 units, 4 industrial units or separate users on the site. The units 1, 2 and 3, the leases expire in 2028 with a break clause at 2023. I'm assuming that the break clause is a clause which allows the applicant to negotiate with tenants for the early surrender of the leases. And Unit 4 expires in 2024. So in the grand scheme of things, I think the leases do surrender in a reasonable time period. So if development didn't start on this scheme until next year and wasn't built out possibly to the end of next year or even in early 2022, you'd only be talking about a couple of years before the other scheme came forward. I hope that answers Councillor Brown's question, Chair.
Thank you.
Does it, Councillor Brown?
Oh, yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Brown. Then we're going to debate then. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chairman. My questions relate to policy RY7 and its relationship to this application. Policy RY7 has 5 bullet points within it. 3 of those, I believe, this application meets quite clearly. That's a site layout designed to take account of existing rainwater, address potential surface water flood risk, ensure appropriate residential amenity for any properties adjoining the employment area, which I think condition 11 adequately covers. That leaves 2 that I'm not so sure about. The first one is appropriate mitigation measures to take for noise associated with a railway to potentially include insulation and orientation of living spaces. I can't see that this has been specifically addressed anywhere, unless it's part of 11, but isn't very clear. So I'd like to see the condition made a little bit clearer if it does cover that one. And the second one is this site was originally allocated for 48 homes. It was then subsequently increased to 60 homes. And the first bullet point covers that, and it says higher density flatter development may be achieved given the surrounding built form. Now, this development with the 28 plus if you went to the 39 actually gives you a total of 67, which is quite in advance. 10% increase from the increased 60, quite a big increase over the original allocation. Just some assurance about density and it's not getting too dense in relation to anything roundabout.
Thank you. Richard, would you like to
Yes,
respond?
through you, Chairman. Condition 11 deals with noise. The council's EHO has been consulted, and you'll note that they refer to a noise and vibration assessment and by Cass Allen. That needs to be submitted to and approved by, or the implementation of that needs to be submitted to and approved by the local planning authority, obviously prior to first occupation. We are, we have environmental health specialists who deal with noise issues, and they're satisfied. The other advantage with having flats on phase one, of course, well, not of course, but it is an advantage, is that it does provide, there's no outdoor space as such for these units. And as a result, flatted development near railways provides some useful attenuation of noise and protection for family housing, which is on the other side, or say family housing with gardens, rather, on the other side of the scheme. So our EHOs, or your EHOs, are satisfied that the scheme would be satisfactorily insulated against noise. That's also an issue, through you, Chair, Councillor Levitt, in relation to thermal engineering. You'll note from the report there has been an objection from the owner of thermal engineering, and I understand it entirely. Their view is that if residential development is placed on the boundary and their work practices are challenged by occupiers because there's noise issues, then that becomes a problem for thermal engineering, and I understand that completely. But we are reliant on our EHOs to advise us on insulation. And again, they are saying that subject to the mitigation set out in the Cass Allen report, that level of noise should be perfectly able to be successfully attenuated. The other point I would make on that is, if you notice the design of the buildings, the principal windows face north and south, and it's generally service windows and small windows that face the boundary with thermal engineering. So that will also help. Councillor Levitt's other question, I believe, was on density. You'll note in the report that I do have reservations about overdeveloping this site. Now, the reservations I have is that what we should be doing is creating clearly we should be creating decent living environments for inhabitants. And in that regard, I've accepted the challenge that's been set by the developer to affect overall greening. And you'll note that I've added a subsequent informative in that regard. So the figure of 39 units on the remainder of the site is an upper quantum. If I was asked to give a view now on the detail of that scheme, I would say 39 needs to be very robustly justified. In my view, it will be lower than that, and it will be a number that is consistent with the applicant's own stated objective of overall greening. And that's why I've included that informative. So it's in the forefront of everyone's mind, the developer included, that such greening should be an integral or central part of any reserved matters application for phases 2 and 3.
Okay, thank you for that one. I was a little bit concerned over the noise because of a development in Black Horse Road in Letchworth, where we put housing right next to industrial, and we have had some issues with that since then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Richard. I did have Councillor Mantle's hand up, but it's disappeared. Is any... Councillor Allen, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Parking for the current spaces, I've got a bit of an issue here because I think development of brownfield sites is fantastic and needed. We have 42 parking spaces for these units, and by our own guidance, ideally we should have 50. Now I can see that we've also got the bicycle sheds, which is great, and it is relatively close to the station, but we seem to be allowing a few things to get past in advance of it going through. I'm very up and down on how I feel about this development. I've been up and down Orchard Road a few times for a long time. I'm nervous if this is the right design and the right number of vehicles to be going in and out of that road.
Thank you. Councillor Allen. Councillor Mantle. You're on mute, I think. Councillor Mantle, you're on mute. Need to unmute.
I had unmuted, it muted itself again. Obviously, the technology is not 100%. Anyway, I've wanted to go back a step and actually talk about the principle. It is a very great concern to me to be losing industrial, commercial, employment land for any reason, especially as we are now several years on from the time the plan was, the new local plan was originally devised, and things have changed in all sorts of ways since then, not least, I suspect, in needing a lot more local employment and a lot less reliance on the railway and commuting. And I think we've just got the cart and the horse the wrong way around with this application. I personally think that we should be conserving industrial and employment land within the district as a matter of principle, and have to have much stronger reasons than we have in this case for dispensing with it. Incidentally, I think a brownfield site, to describe this as a brownfield site, is a little bit of exaggeration. It's still, as far as I'm aware, an active employment site, but that's another matter. But I think we should always have to have very strong reasons for allowing industrial or employment land of any kind to go into residential. And especially as we've no idea at the moment what's going to happen when the final lockdown occurs in terms of employment, much higher levels of local employment, much higher levels of small businesses. We're just going in the wrong direction based on what was the accepted policies about several years ago. And I think time has moved on and we haven't watched what's happening.
Thank you. I have no other speakers who wish to speak. Please raise your hand if you wish to join the debate. Councillor Brown.
It's interesting to hear about the concern about the number of units, and the town council raised the objection about the height. And I know there have been some concerns about the height, and we saw from the street scene that the height of these 4-storey blocks is 2 meters higher than the adjacent Braben Walk. I'm not sure how the height of these blocks compares with the existing units on the site, but I don't know whether it would be possible to reduce them slightly, reduce the height slightly, and reduce the number. Then that would kind of 2 birds with 1 stone. Is that possible, or would make them unviable?
I think that would be one for Richard to answer. Thank you, Ruth.
Through you, Chair, you have to determine what's before you. If members want to refuse planning permission, they would need, because they consider that the development is at odds with its surroundings in terms of the height, then clearly that's within your gift. That's not the recommendation before you. So I can't really speculate on if a lesser scheme would be acceptable, because we haven't assessed a lesser scheme.
Richard, you had a diagram in your presentation of the height differences, didn't you? Is it worth looking at that slide again?
If Hilary can go back to the presentation, yes, we can have a look at that. That's a good idea, Chair.
Is that all right, Hilary?
Could we also see the height compared with the existing commercial buildings?
No, because there's no section showing that, Councillor Brown.
But there is a photo though, isn't there?
Yes, there's a photograph, but clearly that doesn't show the new development.
but okay, but it does show roughly what the existing buildings look like.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get the plan to come up. Just 1 second.
Thank you.
I'm ashamed to say it's user error, but I'm struggling to get it to come up again.
I think if I remember rightly, with the surrounding buildings, it was at half height again. I'm just trying to. Was it one?
Apologies, I'm going to have to start it up again on my computer. It's died. Hang on.
Okay, Hilary. I could take a question in the meantime while you're doing that, if that helps. Hilary?
Sorry, yes, sorry, I'm struggling to get it to come up. It's
So I could take another question from a committee member while you're doing that.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to you then. Councillor Hunter.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, obviously this site was already in our emerging local plan, RY7. Obviously at the time, I didn't think it would actually progress because obviously the change in classification on the Johnson and Matthews site, but obviously the health and safety issues have been addressed and it's not a problem. The question I had was that obviously there's a traffic management plan within the conditions. I just wondered if Mr. Tiffin could give me some assurance that obviously when it's actually submitted, we will of course think about the busy times, morning and evening, as far as the site area is concerned, and obviously the adjacent Braeburn Walk. Obviously, as far as to address something Councillor Mantle said, to give him some assurance, I'd probably feel exactly the same way about employment land, but this is adjacent to actual housing that exists at the moment. And also our employment land is expanding on the other side to the north. And we will be seeing applications for new buildings for employment on the Gateway site, which is quite good to see that that's progressing. But back to Mr. Tiffin and my concern about the traffic management plan.
Thank you. Richard?
Yes, through you, Chair. Councillor Hunter makes a good point. The Highway Authority are not recommending the imposition of, I'm assuming you mean a construction management plan, Councillor Hunter, through you, Chair.
Muted, Tony.
Yep. Yes, that's correct. I said wrong word. Apologies.
Hello. Hello.
Hey, Richard.
Is everyone there?
Yes, yeah. I think
sorry,
I
I don't know what happened there. There isn't a construction management plan as such because this phase one doesn't connect directly to the highway network. It connects through a private, essentially a private road. It's only when phases 2 and 3 would be completed that it would connect to the highway maintained at public expense. So there isn't a construction management plan as such, but I do not see any reason why we can't put a standard construction management plan to be submitted and approved by the local planning authority in conjunction with the Highway Authority, if that's a concern of Councillor Hunter. Through you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. It sounds a reasonable thing to maybe request as a. Would that be a condition, Richard?
Yes, it would, Chair. It would read something to the effect. We've got a standard one that we get from Herts County Council. It would be something like prior to the commencement of work on site, the applicant should a construction management plan to the local planning authority, detailing all kinds of things like times of attendance, wheel washing, and all those kind of things. So if Councillor Hunter feels that that would be an appropriate condition, then that by all means could be added to the list of conditions.
With your permission, Chairman, I'm quite happy with that. I was a little confused by condition 9, Mr. Tiffin.
Do forgive me, Chair, it's already there. Sorry.
That was my principal question about involving actual times and when traffic's going to be going in there, etc.
Yes.
You had me a little confused.
Well, we can have two if you like, Councillor Hunter, through you, Chair.
All right.
Somewhat unnecessary, I would suggest.
If it's already there, then that's fine then. Can we go back to Councillor Brown's question about the height and have a look at these?
I can share now. So
thank you, Hilary. Richard, if you could talk us through.
Yes, okay, Hilary, if you could advance through the plans, and I'll tell you when to stop.
Yeah. If I can actually, I am still having trouble. So Mark, could you take over, Mark Robinson, please? I'm having trouble with my controls.
Yes,
so,
just one moment.
Yeah, apologies, everybody.
No problem. Mark, are you able to take over?
Yes, just loading it now.
Thank you. And I do realise that we've got Councillor Levitt waiting to speak as well.
Hopefully you should see that now.
Yes.
Yep.
And which side would you like to go to?
Well, if you advance through, Mark, and I'll tell you when to stop. Stop.
Yeah, back again.
Sorry, previous one.
Yeah.
Through you, Chair.
Yes.
Yes, I mean, I take Councillor Brown's point, and there is a question. It was a question from the start from me whether we limit this to 3 stories or 4 stories. The difference between a 4-story development as proposed and the maximum height of the development in Braeburn Walk to the left is something in the order of 2 metres. I don't think we could sustain a reason for refusal based on that difference. I think that an inspector, and again, this is a judgment, but I think an inspector would conclude that that relationship is not incongruous. It is a judgment, and that's a judgment that I've taken in the application. Of course, members will draw their own conclusions and take a view themselves. And so I can say nothing more than that. That's what the applicant feels is appropriate. That's what the architect feels is appropriate. It might be worth noting the balcony spaces that are shown on here. Somewhat unusual, but I fully understand, particularly in light of the pandemic, how important having some kind of open space is to people, particularly if they're confined to their homes. So I can see the value in balconies, but they do need to be carefully designed. You'll notice, if we could go forward a slide, you'll see that the applicant has done some work, because I did have a concern about this, and it's a concern that is exacerbated by differences in height, I have to say. And the applicant has satisfied me that this is an acceptable relationship. However, again, privacy is a highly subjective area. If we can go back to the section, thank you. There is a condition that requires the details of, as a precaution, and I mention it in the report, I have asked for details of balcony screening. And what I would imagine would be considered acceptable would be obscure glazed balcony screening which turns the corner. So if you look at the top floor, views from that window would effectively be limited to down the road, not across to the Braben Walk scheme, by the installation of balcony features or screens that we would have to agree before development commenced. But I do understand Councillor Brown's point. Again, it's a matter of judgment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Richard. Councillor Brown, are you happy with that response?
Yes, and I think whilst we don't have the plan of other, I think there are other buildings opposite that are of a similar height. So these some of the industrial units. I wasn't exactly sure how tall the commercial buildings were in the same area that will form part of phase 2 and phase 3, which will obviously be knocked down. But yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got quite a lot of sympathy with Councillor Mantle's view about losing employment land to housing. However, we don't know where we're going to be in the future, as Councillor Mantle rightly says. We are probably going to have more people living at home and working at home. But it's difficult to find reasons not to approve this development. It is in the local plan, even though it's still an emerging working plan, and very slowly at the moment. We do have the land supply issue that Mr. Hoskins mentioned. We do have a lot of detailed conditions and informatives in here. Personally, I'd be very surprised to see the other phases actually go ahead. But I say I can't find any reasons not to approve it. The local authority has a duty to facilitate development, so therefore try and move it on a little bit by proposing that we approve the recommendation, approve the Grant Planning Commission.
You're moving that, Councillor Levitt?
Certainly am.
Yeah. I just wanted to check with Councillor Hunter, because he's still got his hand up just a bit before we move on. Is there something you want to say, Councillor Hunter?
Yes, Chairman. I was going to move on and do exactly what Mr. Levitt has just done, Councillor Levitt has just done. And obviously, I am exceptionally pleased about condition 23 and the way that our officer has dealt with the overlooking issue. And also, nobody's mentioned it, but also the fact that we've now got 30% affordable housing across all 3 phases. So I'd like to second Councillor Levitt. Thank you.
Okay, we've got. Thank you very much. So we've got a proposer and a seconder. What I was going to do is ask Richard to actually respond with any recommendations, but I'm guessing that there is nothing more for you to say, Richard.
Thankfully, Chair, no.
No. Okay, thank you. So a proposer and a seconder. We're going into the vote, and we, as we've voted before, it's the same procedure of raising your hand, but we'll be guided through by Matt to tell us when to raise our hand, depending on how we're going to vote. So, Matthew.
Okay, thank you, Chair. So, members, if you want to vote for the recommendation, please now use the hand function. This is the vote for the recommendation. Thank you. So I'm just going to go through the names as they appear. So Councillor Weeks, Councillor Sunan Gwala, Councillor Val Bryant, Councillor Ruth Brown, Councillor Sean Prendergast, Councillor Tony Hunter, Councillor Mike Rice, Councillor Morgan Derbyshire, Councillor Ian Moody, Councillor David Levitt, okay, let's make sure I have everybody. Okay, so I just confirm. So I've got Councillor Ruth Brown, Councillor Val Bryant, Councillor Morgan Derbyshire, Councillor Mike Hewson, Councillor Tony Hunter, Councillor David Levitt, Councillor Ian Moody, Councillor Sunan Gwala, Councillor Sean Prendergast, Councillor Mike Rice, and Councillor Michael Weeks. That's for the recommendation.
And me too, actually. Terry here.
Okay, sure.
I got my hand raised anyway. Looks like it.
Sorry, Councillor Tyler. Okay, thank you. Okay, so now if we can all lower those hands, please. Thank you. So all the hands have been lowered. So I'm now going to ask for members to raise a hand for against the motion, against the recommendation. So I have Councillor Mantle.
That's it.
Thank you. So the motion, the recommendation is carried. That's for the recommendation.
Abstentions?
Abstentions.
And any abstentions, members to raise hands for any abstentions.
That's right.
And that's Councillor Daniel Allen to abstention. Okay, so that's the motion is carried.
And that's with all the conditions. Was there any? We were talking about other conditions, but they were all cleared off, weren't they? There is no new conditions.
No, Chair, that
Okay. Right. Okay, that's
is
carried.
for
Right, item 6, which is the second item on our list. It's just gone 9 o'clock. I just wanted to ask a sort of straw poll. I was thinking that if we go on to, we're going to go on till quite a way, I think. But if we reach 9:30, would everybody happy with a 5-minute comfort break, or would you? Maybe you raise your hand if you agree with a 5-minute comfort break at 9:30.
Yes.
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, at 9:30 then. I'll take that as 9:30. We'll have a 5-minute comfort break. So we'll move on to item 6, which is 189 High Street, Codicote, Hitchin, Hertfordshire. Erection of a 4-bedroom dwelling with associated parking, bin, cycle storage, and alterations to existing vehicular access following demolition of existing dwelling. This is correct. It's asking me to invite Councillor Moody to inform the committee.
Yes, Councillor Tyler.
Okay. Sorry, Councillor.
Good evening, committee. Yeah, I'll be speaking as a ward councillor on this one, so I won't take part in the debate or the voting.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Right. May I ask Simon Ellis to present this item and any updates that may be applicable?
Oh, thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. Can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Good. Okay, I've just got a few updates and then I'd like to just carefully go through the slides, if I may. First of all, the update is that since the report was written, the applicant has agreed the pre-commencement conditions, which is a requirement now for it. We have to ask the applicant to agree any pre-commencement conditions, and they've done that. Just to mention, there was a condition missing. The standard material samples condition was missing from the report. It should have been appeared at about number 3, so that needs to be added in. And also, there's a condition 10 on the recommendation that can be removed. That's following advice from Hertfordshire Ecology.
Simon, so sorry to interrupt. You sound quite soft voice-wise, quite low.
Okay, I'll speak up. How's that? Is that better?
That's a bit better. Does everybody agree? Yeah.
Yeah, so Hearts Ecology advice has been received, and they're no longer requiring condition 10, which is the reptile management and reptile survey, because that related to the previous planning application, which included development within the paddock land to the rear of the development site. So that's no longer required. So condition 10 can be dropped from the recommendation. But condition 10 would then I would like to replace with a condition which is the standard multi-phase contaminated land condition, because we've also just received comments from the Environmental Protection Officer. So we'll replace, my recommendation is to replace condition 10 with the contaminated land condition, which I won't read out because it's very long and technical. So those are the updates. Now can I turn to the slides, please?
Showing that now. You should be able to see that now.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is the site location plan. You can see the access off the high street, and you can see the existing bungalow on the site, and you can see the greenbelt boundary around the settlement on the notation. Can I have the next slide, please? This is a photograph of the access to the site taken from the high street in between the two houses on either side. You can see it's quite a well-wooded access, quite a rural aspect to that access. Can I have the next slide, please? This is a photograph taken slightly further south on the other side of the high street, and you can see the access in a wider context. Again, a very wooded aspect there as you come into Codicot from the south. Can I have the next slide, please? This is even further south. It's a slightly wider view across the site from further south down off the edge of the village. And can I have the next slide, please? Again, even further south. Can I have the next one, please? And this is in the site itself, looking into the development area. You can have the next one, please. And then this is just inside the access, so you're looking all the way along the narrow access to the position where the development would take place. Can I have the next one, please? That's the site location plan, which goes with the planning application. You can see the red line includes the access onto the high street that a lot of the photographs were taken of, and then the existing bungalow on the big square plot of land. And then within the blue line is the paddock area. And some members will recall back in 2019, it was the May committee of 2019 that permission was refused for a similar development on this site for 4 houses, but they included the use of the blue land for garden space, and that was recommended for approval by officers. Members refused planning permission for that and was dismissed on appeal on the 20th of January this year on the basis that the inspector didn't agree to have development within the green belt. Can I have the next slide, please? So this is the layout of the 3 dwellings proposed to demolish the existing bungalow on the site and then to replace with 3 2-story dwellings and garaging and car parking. That's the layout plan, and you can see the garages. And also in the bottom corner near where the high street is, there's a little notation there on the access on the right-hand side. That's a bin store, so that will be where the refuse collection could take place, so that the refuse vehicles and the operators wouldn't need to drag the bins too far to collect waste from the site. Can I have the next slide, please? This is an elevation of the existing bungalow, so that's not really relevant to this. Can I have the next one, please? And here's plot 1, which would be the plot that faces you as you come down the access drive, and that's the design. So we've got the hip roof. They are 8.2 meters to the ridge, and that's the standard design of each dwelling. Can I have the next slide, please? And then this is a garage block for plot 1, double garage with a pitch roof. And the next one, please. And here's plot 2, which is the next to plot 1. so the back of the site, which would then back onto the paddock area. So again, a similar design to plot 1. And next slide, please. And there's plot 3. So that's the one behind the 2 dwellings at the front of the site. And can I have the next slide? And then there's a single garage as well. And the next one, please. That's it. Those are the updates. Those are the slides. Just to mention that the development proposal is now 100% contained within the excluded village in the existing local plan, and also the emerging local plan has Codicot as one of the villages for growth. So all proposed development has been removed from the green belt now, and so this is very much a response to the refusal of planning permission and the appeal dismissed, and so we recommend approval for this revised scheme. So that's the updates. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Simon. The appeal, when you say dismissed, that means it was upheld, was it? Or from the last time we looked at this?
Yeah, it meant the inspector dismissed the appeal, so the inspector agreed with the committee resolution, which was to refuse planning permission.
Oh, he did. Right, I wasn't 100% sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. May I ask or invite Mr. Tom Brindley to speak in objection to this application, please? Thank you, Simon. As you know, you have five minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to make it clear I do not object to development on this site, but I do object to this development. It's pushing the site capacity by exceeding the 20 dwellings per hectare standard, but my main objection is the houses are too high for the edge of the village, within a few metres of the green belt, too high for the neighbouring bungalows, and unnecessarily high. No use is made of the roof space, it just blocks light and overshadows neighbours. Now, I assume that all members have visited the site. If not, I wonder how you can form a view of the impact of it. Sometimes I wonder if the case officer visited the site. Although the photographs show some, they're very misleading. While the proposal no longer attempts to incorporate greenbelt land, the impact on the greenbelt remains. Development adjacent to the greenbelt also impacts the greenbelt. The design principles SPD states that the height, volume and shape of a building or group of buildings will have an impact on the surrounding buildings and spaces. The impact is exacerbated by the elevated height of the site. Plots 1 and 2 are significantly closer to the greenbelt boundary than the existing property and are significantly higher. This site elevation, 2 to 3 metres higher than the adjacent properties, must be taken into account when assessing the acceptability of even ridge heights. On density, the developer claims the site to be 0.18 hectares, but excluding the access road, the site is only 0.14 hectares, giving a density of 21 dwellings per hectare, exceeding the 20 hectare limit. Policy 57 of the Safe Local Plan requires that housing proposals should relate to and enhance their site and surroundings, and the layout and design of the proposed dwellings and site will maintain and improve the character of the immediate context. This development will not maintain the character of the immediate context. The existing building is a chalet bungalow and will not enhance the character of the immediate context. Policy D1 states that the design must respond positively to the site's local context. This design is incongruous with the site's local context. D1 states that the development must respond positively to the site, taking into consideration position, orientation, scale, height, layout, massing. The height, layout and massing all fail this test. D1 requires that consideration is given to the effect that the proposal may have on the living conditions of neighbouring occupiers. The site, and particularly the heights, do not give sufficient consideration to these effects. Policy D2 states that permission should be granted if the proposal enhances the character and setting of the site. This site design is not in conformance with D2. With the roof forms, the report states that the design has appropriate roof forms, but the same accommodation could be achieved with alternative roof forms giving a lower ridge height. Dormers, double pitch mansard roofs, pitch and flat roof. Regarding the specific plots, plot 1 garage has an eave height of 2.5 metres and a ridge height of 5.4 metres, which will dominate the bungalow at 1898. A flat roof construction would alleviate this. Plot 1 is due east of 1898 and will block morning light from the front garden and midday light from the rear garden. The large mass of the garage, coupled with the unnecessarily high ridge height, would overwhelm the small bungalow. Plot 3 ridge height is 8.2 metres, but actually it's 10.2 metres relative to the other houses in front, 193. It was within 10 foot of its boundary, but that's much lower. There's a sheer step. Well, the parking meets the standard just. The usage on there's plenty. Small site means there'll be a hoovering of cars and a lot of noise will come from there. And access road is really unusual. The photographs really show it, because it's not the road's there now, it's a brand new one taking down all those trees which are there. It's a totally different access to the one that's at the moment. The condition to protect the highway doesn't protect
the 5 minutes is up.
So in conclusion, that does not meet the standards set out in policy D1, policy 56 exceeds the 20 dwellings per hectare, and the design breaches the design principle PD. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brindley, you broke up a little bit here and there. I think the signal's just broke up a bit, so we didn't hear every single word, especially towards the end.
I'll repeat anything. I'll take any questions.
Well, what we'll do is I'll move on to questions from the committee members. Would anybody like to ask a question? We've got Councillor Weeks first to ask Mr. Brindley a question.
Tom Brindley, hi. Can you just give us your view of where exactly the peak of the ridge is? Is it between plots 1 and 2, or is it at the far eastern end of the plot? Where's the actual ridge, or is the whole thing on a plateau ridge?
The ridge is where the current building is, and then runs back for about 5 metres, almost greenbelt boundary, and then it starts to fall away, and then it falls away substantially. So the plot basic is the top of the ridge.
So it does slope away a little bit to the east, does it?
It slopes away on 3 sides.
Okay.
It slopes to the footpath, it slopes to road, and it's towards the street.
Councillor Brown?
Yeah, my question was about the access. I'm a bit confused because the pictures we've been shown show a current access, and I can't see anything different from the plans, and you're saying it's a new access. So I'm a little bit confused. So could you explain what you mean?
Yeah, the current access serves 187 and 189A. It also currently serves 189. But that land, I understand, is not owned by the developer. And so the green area to the side, there were a lot of trees and bushes, dug out to access. There'll be 2 accesses in parallel. There'll be a new road serving this, and there'll be old access to the other house. It'll be a bit of a muddle. If you look on the red, you'll see the red outline of the plot because the new access.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions for Mr. Brindley? I can see no hands raised. Officers, is that correct?
Yeah, no further questions.
Mr. Brindley, thank you very much for your talk and time. We'll now move on to member advocate. May I invite Councillor Ian Moody to speak as a member advocate, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, committee members. I've been asked to call this application in on behalf of Codicote Parish Council and members of the public who live around the development. The Parish Council believes that these amended plans still do not represent an appropriate development for an edge of the built village site adjacent to the Greenbelt. The site is clearly visible from the higher land to the east, and the village crisscrosses by its footpaths and lanes, which are popular with local walkers and cyclists, would not fit in with the existing buildings already. The existing buildings are low-level bungalows or chalet bungalows, which sit on larger plots, making the area sparsely developed. The density of the proposed is in conflict with this, and therefore is not symptomatic to the area. Although the roof levels have been altered, the height of the dwellings still are imposing and would have a significant detrimental impact on the surrounding properties. The property's widening of the access would negatively impact adjacent properties, particularly the privacy of the residents of 191 The High Street. The Parish Council also have concerns about the increased traffic accessing onto the High Street in respect of safety and congestion. Whilst the previous proposal was clearly unacceptable in respect of its inappropriate use of the green belt, this proposal renders the green belt proportion of the site inaccessible to pedestrians and vehicles. Historically, this land has been a valuable piece of pasture land. The developer has stated they have no plans for this site. The Parish Council are concerned that the site will now serve no purpose and will consequently remain unmanaged. I would also like to bring to the attention, as Mr. Brinley has stated, the necessary roof heights. The site is elevated 2 metres higher than 191 and 3 metres higher than 193. No account seems to be taken of this, so the roof heights are slightly misleading. If these houses were chalet bungalows making use of the roof space for accommodation, rather like the existing and neighbouring properties, perhaps this would be an acceptable design that could be achieved. The developer claims there's a housing need, but not in Codicat for the developer claims a housing need, but the need in Codicat is for 3 bedrooms, not 4-bedroom houses. I have visited the site and indeed the proposed development would have a negative impact on 191 and 193. I believe that refusing this application with a suggestion of a revised application for 3-bedroom chalets would be a good solution. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Moody. Do we have some questions for Councillor Moody? I can see no hands raised. Is that correct, officers?
No, Chair. No question.
Councillor Moody, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Oh, Councillor Moody, can I ask you to turn off your mic and camera now that we have no further questions for you?
Yeah, of course, Cam.
Yeah, thank you. We'll now move on to supporter. Please may I invite Miss Amy Cannon to speak on support of the application.
I'm speaking on behalf of the applicant, Alderham Residential, a local SME developer operating solely within Herts and the home counties. Alderham Residential plans to demolish the existing dwelling at 189 High Street in order to provide 3 4-bedroom dwellings, 2 additional dwellings over that which already exists. The applicant engaged with the Parish Council during their meeting on the 3rd of March. The minutes that followed the meeting confirmed that the parish had no objection to the scheme and that they were satisfied with the amendments. This is stated on their website. Following the meeting, the parish then raised an objection on matters that officers and members had not raised to the previous scheme. In fact, the only planning matter of concern with the previous application was the inclusion of greenbelt land. This application has been amended to remove any land within that designation. Every other aspect of the scheme, height, scale, massing and access, was considered acceptable. In advance of this meeting, the applicant has provided all members with a briefing note, which addresses in detail each of these concerns raised by the Parish Council. There are several benefits to the scheme over and above those that the previous scheme offered. The scheme comprises a lower density development with more landscaping opportunities as a result of reduced hard standing areas and also enhanced ecology benefits. The proposal would also result in improved widened access with safer sightlines onto the High Street. 2 objections from immediate neighbours were received, and these concerns were largely immaterial to the application, as is outlined in the officer's report, but I would like to respond to these in a bit more detail. Greenbelt. The revised application does not include any land within the Greenbelt, so there would be no impact upon the openness of the designation. The application site sits within a logical extension of the village, being demarcated with strong established landscape boundaries. It would indeed be impossible. It would be possible to see the dwellings from locations within the Greenbelt, as can most of the buildings along the edge of the settlement of Codicot, but this should not preclude development. Height. Planning policy does not preclude against two-storey dwellings at the application site. It is wholly unreasonable to suggest that the height of the bungalow should serve as a height reference for new development coming forward on the site, and to advocate as such would be lax in the face of much needed housing. The scheme has been designed in close dialogue with officers and comprises features such as half-hipped roofs that are prevalent in the area. Dormers were removed from the initial design to reduce the perception of height of the proposed homes. The dwellings are indeed at a higher elevation than the existing homes fronting High Street. However, this needs to be read in context. Plot number 3 would be at a separation distance of 17 metres for 191 and 193 High Street. This measurement accords with recommended separation distances between habitable room windows, but in this case, the side elevation of plot number 3 has been designed to ensure that there are no windows on the 7 elevation. This is therefore an improvement over and above the recommended separation distance. The development wouldn't result in overlooking or loss of privacy. Plots number 1 and 2 are set back even further, over 25 metres from the rear elevation of 191, and as such, an overbearing argument is not relevant in the particular circumstances of this application. Access to the paddock. The land does not sit within the planning application red line, and so access to the paddock should not be a material consideration. Nonetheless, the applicant is happy to provide access to the paddock through the rear garden of one of the dwellings, and a right-of-way can be dealt with via a restrictive covenant, which will be binding to the land. This has already
30-second warning.
This has already been discussed with officers. The proposal is a small-scale housing development within a village identified for growth. The scheme is policy compliant and officers support the scheme and has recommended approval. The only issue raised to the planning previous application, inclusion of greenbelt land, has been resolved, and all statutory consultees support the application, indicating that the scheme is objectively fit for approval. In short, the scheme concerns a site that is available and deliverable quickly. We ask that members consider the application on its own merits and not of future applications that are outside of the settlement boundary to support and grant planning permission. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Cannon. We can't see you. You could switch on the video if you want to, or you don't have to. But we can hear you plainly, but I can't see you. I'll just let you know whether you knew that or not. Oh, hello.
Yeah.
You can see you now. Do we have any questions for Ms. Cannon? Yes, Councillor Weeks.
Michael, you're muted. Councillor Weeks, you're muted.
Sorry, thank you. You say in your presentation that the present proposed development has no impact on the green belt. I think they were your actual words. Do you not feel that the bulk of these proposed houses standing on a ridge, particularly being viewed from the east, will be detrimental to the green belt?
As I said, the dwellings themselves would be visible from within the green belt. However, that shouldn't preclude development within the settlement site. There are also other dwellings along the settlement boundary of Codicot that are visible from footways within the green belt.
Well, I hear what you say.
Okay. Thank you. Councillor Allen.
Hi. May I ask, with the new access that's being put through to the houses at the back, is a two-part question really. Do you own the access road? And are you going to be widening the access road? And if so, to what width?
Yes, so the applicant does own the access land. The access actually will be widened to an improved access width of 4.1 metres.
Okay. So that's wide enough then for... Does that include the pathways either side, or does it just include the road access?
That's just the road access.
Just the road access. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions? Oh, yes, Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening. Quick question for you. I think it might have been Councillor Moody or perhaps Mr. Brindley mentioned that they asked the developer about what would happen with that land that remains in the Greenbelt as part of the plot, and was told there's no plans or anything for done what they're going to do with it. Is there anything happening with that one? Could you just clarify that?
There is no plans with that part of the site, and that's why it's been excluded from this application.
Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Hewson.
Thanks. I was just wondering, with the widening of the access road, will there be any loss of trees or shrubbery?
There was an arboricultural report that was submitted with the application. So that does specify that there will be 7 trees that will need to be lost. These are low quality trees, and the arboricultural officer has supported that. There is also going to be landscaping opportunities as part of the application. So that will replace the trees that are lost.
Okay, thank you very much. We've got room for one more question. I can't see any hands raised, so I think let's say thank you, Ms. Cannon, and thank you for your input. And what we'll do now is we'll normally go to Simon to respond to any issues raised, but I do realise it's 9:30, and we may take a 5-minute break, should I say, before we go into Simon's response and debate. Well, thank you very much for your time and your input.
Thank you.
Is everybody okay for a 5-minute break? Hands up. Okay, I'll make it 32 minutes. So if we give 21:37, we'll be back then. Please leave all the equipment on.
Chair, can I just remind you to disable your cameras?
Oh yes, okay. Please disable your cameras. Video. Okay, if I could ask everybody to reconvene, please.
Chair, you just need us to confirm everybody's back before you proceed.
Okay. Are we doing a roll call to do that?
I'll be able to see from the system that everybody's back, Chair.
Okay. Sorry, Melanie, you're saying they are back. I'm just looking at it. Quite a few of the videos are off and microphones.
I'm getting a message that unable to start video is switched off by the host.
All
Sorry,
right.
who was that?
We need the recording to go live again. Although I've got a recording live. Is everybody? I'm not sure how to make sure everybody's back. Mel, we assuming they are back, or we should be doing a roll call?
Matthew, can you do a roll call, please?
Sorry, Chair. Yes, I'll do a roll call now.
Thank you.
Okay, so Councillor Tyler.
Present.
Councillor Allen.
Present.
Councillor Brown.
Present.
Councillor Bryant. Yeah. Councillor Derbyshire.
Present.
Councillor Hewson.
Yeah.
Councillor Hunter.
Present.
Councillor Levitt.
Yeah.
Councillor Mantle.
Present.
Councillor Moody.
Present.
Councillor Nguala.
Present.
Councillor Prendergast.
Present.
Councillor Rice.
Present.
And Councillor Weeks.
Present.
That's everybody, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, thank you. Right, can I ask Simon Ellis to respond to any issues that have been raised during the questions?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just cast members' minds back to May 2019, 30th of May 2019. This committee refused planning permission for a very similar development on this site for 4 dwellings, and the dwellings themselves were on almost an identical sort of footprint and spread as this development. The difference with that scheme was that the gardens of the dwellings to the rear extended across the paddock. And the refusal reason of that decision was the proposal would comprise inappropriate development in the greenbelt. And in the opinion of the local planning authority, there are no very special circumstances that would outweigh the harm caused to the greenbelt by reason of inappropriateness and harm to the openness. The development would therefore conflict with Section 13 of the National Planning Policy Framework, Policy 2 of the North Hertfordshire District Local Plan, and Policy SP5 of the Emerging Local Plan. Now, the main concern that the members of the committee had at that time was the use of land, of greenbelt land, for domestic garden space. And officers took a balanced view to recommend approval that you'd have the development contained in the settlement boundary, but then the gardens would be used within the greenbelt land. The inspector agreed with that conclusion, but when he dismissed the appeal in January this year, he was very explicit in saying that his concern was the use of the paddock as garden land. So the aspects that have been debated this evening and mentioned by the speakers were considered implicitly last time. So the access, for example, the widening of the access, that was the same as the previous scheme. The height of the dwellings was the same, if not slightly higher than the last scheme. So the other aspects that are being thrown into the mix at this point were part of the previous proposal, that because the committee only refused it on the basis of the one concern you had about use of the paddock land as domestic garden, it's going to be very difficult for you to throw in other aspects now that you didn't criticise last time. So you're not bound by your previous decision, but the appeal decision is a very significant material consideration, and it's implicit in that decision that the widening of the access was not found an objectionable point by the inspector. The height of the buildings was 8.3 meters, and that was 4 dwellings on the plot. You're now looking at 8.2. Okay, it's very marginal, but it's about the same. So the actual massing and spread of development is arguably lower than it was last time. The density calculation that Councillor Brindley points out, I mean, you can argue that on a mathematical assessment, but the actual spread of development is lower than the previous schemes. You've now got 3 dwellings on a site. The difference being that you would have had to have counted the garden land within the development density calculation last time. So you'd have got a nominally lower density because your development spread is greater, but the most of that development will be taken up by the garden land. So I think you've got to give the applicant some credit that they've fully addressed the reason for refusal of the committee's decision in May 2019 and fully addressed the inspector's concerns in the dismissal appeal in January 2020, so not that long ago. So to now start throwing in other reasons that we should have added all this last time, that's going to be a little bit difficult to defend. So I think really you're in a bit of a spot there. I think you need to think to yourself, does this overcome the previous reason for refusal? All other aspects to the scheme are pretty much the same as what you obviously implicitly considered to be acceptable last time, because as I mentioned earlier, all you really refused it on last time was the use of the paddock land as domestic garden land, and the inspector agreed with you, but he didn't throw in anything else that you're now sort of throwing into the mix at this particular time. Of course, there is a difference in that the garden spaces are now quite a lot smaller and a little bit awkward, but they do meet the minimum standards for garden spaces in terms of how much amenity space is on the scheme. And then you've got the access to the paddock. Well, there wouldn't have been any access to the paddock last time. So again, that's a comparable factor. It's really about the applicant has addressed the committee's reason for refusal and the appeal decision. So if you start throwing in other aspects now that we didn't consider last time, that's going to be difficult for credibility at any subsequent appeal. So that's it for me on the updates.
Thank you, Simon. One of the things you just mentioned is access to the paddock. I thought it was an offer. Was that, or is that access to the Greenbelt paddock an offer, or is that a condition now?
You'll see that the scheme includes access to the paddock only through the gardens of the dwelling. So to get public access is going to be a bit difficult.
Did I misunderstand Miss Cannon's offer then? I thought she said that we could consider.
Yeah, I think they're offering something in the lines of, I don't know how you get access to the paddock, because if you look at the layout plan, it's coming from the access into development. The paddock boundary is the garden boundary of the proposed dwelling, so that's going to be difficult.
Okay. We've got some questions for you, Councillor Nguala. Sue?
Sorry, I didn't have a question.
Oh, so your hand's raised.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'll lower it.
No problem. No problem, Sue. Councillor Brown then.
I just wanted to ask, I take your point about the access, but there was that offer, but can we not condition it? Is that not possible? Because it would be a right of way, and that's a matter for county, I guess. And is there anything we could put in conditions about an access to the paddock?
Simon?
Yeah, Councillor Brown, you're right. We're straying into areas that is going to be difficult for the planning authority to control, because if it's about rights of way, then that's a county matter. My concern is that the development boundary is private gardens. So on what basis would there be an access to a paddock from the development? Because who's going to go and walk through private gardens? And the whole boundary of the site to the paddock will be 2 gardens adjoining each other. So I'm sort of wondering whether you should stray into that element. I mean, if you really feel strongly about maintaining some sort of public access to the paddock, then, and a right of way going through private gardens, then I guess we could concoct some sort of condition that says details of an access to the paddock shall be submitted and approved if feasible, or something like that. A feasibility study or something along those lines, if you really feel strongly about it. But you're stretching the realms of what's credible, really, because in reality, you've got two private gardens that adjoin a paddock, and on what basis should there be a public access through those gardens into a paddock? I mean, it's not really a situation that I would advise upon as being a good idea. But
Simon, I'd say that, but Ms. Cannon actually offered that. We didn't ask for that access. She said that we could.
I haven't been party to any of those discussions, but if the committee feel particularly strongly about that, you could conduct a condition, compile a condition that says something like, the applicant shall prepare a feasibility study for all aspects of gaining public access to the paddock. But again, what are you really asking for? If you grant planning permission for this scheme, you're granting planning permission for two gardens that adjoin a paddock. Did you really want to create a public access through private gardens into a paddock area? I'm not sure any of the purchasers of those dwellings would be too keen on that.
Yeah, I agree. I understand what you're saying, Simon. It's just it was offered, freely offered, to be investigated. It sounds like for villagers that they could actually get access to the paddock.
Well, it may take care of itself. It may be that if you were to grant planning permission for this, it may be that just happens naturally through another process. But if the committee feel particularly strongly about it, I could compile some wording that gets you round that point. But I wouldn't really advise it, because I'm not comfortable with the idea of the planning authority granting permission for 2-3 private houses and then implicitly saying, oh, we also want some public access through private gardens to a paddock. That just doesn't seem quite right to me. But
thank you, Simon. Councillor Allen.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking at the way that we've said that we didn't like the development having gardens on the paddock land. So instead we can have gardens that stop at the paddock land but have access to it, which seems very similar. Because we didn't have any other main reasons, I can't see what we can do to say no to this development legally. Therefore, I would put that we approve of it as stands.
Is that a motion?
It's a motion.
Do I have a seconder? Do we have a seconder?
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you. I have got some other people who'd like to speak, so I was wondering, sorry, officers, can I just, should I ask the other councillors to speak first before we go to a vote?
I think it'd be better, sorry, through you, Chair, it would be better if the vote is taken now, as there's been a proposer and a seconder.
Okay.
I don't know. We covered this last time. What you can debate the motion that's being proposed, but you've still got to debate the motion. You cannot go straight to the vote and not debate the motion fully.
Narrator, is that in agreement with Councillor Levitt?
Well, I don't know that the people with their hands up are going to be talking about the motion that's been proposed, but if they're happy to talk about...
We have two.
They had their hands up before the motion was proposed.
Yes, they did. I agree. Let's there's two councillors with their hands up. Councillor Levitt, then.
3. You can't count.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, the reason
we just spoke to Daniel, so I've only got 2.
Yeah.
Councillor Levitt and Councillor Mantle.
Yeah.
Okay. The reason I wanted to raise this was in relation to the appeal decision. Several people have raised the fact that there is access on to the paddocks from these 2 houses. I think Mr. Councillor Allen questioned the reason behind this. In the inspector's appeal decision, he notes that there were no buildings proposed on the Greenbelt, and it was just the garden access. He did have a number of concerns in some of his reasons about that access and the use of that particular bit of land. He says they would be able. However, the residential use of the Greenbelt would inevitably bring about it, domestic paraphernalia and everything, and he goes on to express his concerns. Is there going to be domestic use of residential use of this paddock as they seem to be the only people to access it. So that's my first point in relation to the appeal decision. The second bit relates to the procedural matters in the appeal decision. I sat on this committee, and those of us that did will remember there was a great discussion about the size, scale and positioning of these buildings on this particular site. And we couldn't really object to it because we're a fair old distance away from the houses. There was supposed to be no overlooking anything like that because they were set right against the greenbelt boundary. However, there has been a material change in this particular application. The original houses were set, plots 1 and 2 as they are now, 1, 2 and 3 as they were 27 metres from the rear boundary of the properties at 191 and 193. The bigger houses that they are now, one of them in particular is 12 metres by 10 metres, so it's quite a substantial amount bigger than the 10 by 7 it was before, move forward 10 metres. So they are now within 17 metres of the rear boundaries of those property. In the procedural matters, the inspector said a revised drawing accompanies appeal. It adds patios to the rear gardens and brings the 3 houses between 1.5 and 2 metres closer to High Street, as it was then. The amendments to the siting of the dwellings, this is the inspector's word, would materially change the effect on the living conditions of neighbouring residents. As such, and pursuant to the Whitcock principles, I did not have regard to this in my decision, as to do so would have likely prejudice to the parties. They're now at 10 metres closer, not 1.5. The inspector himself said they would have a material effect, change the effect on neighbouring properties. In my view, this particular application, with the houses moved that much closer, has that material effect. And I believe that size, position, although it was acceptable last time, now that those houses have moved so far forward, have not, and I cannot support this application on those grounds. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mountain?
Before I start, I would like to say that my understanding of the rules of debate are that when a proposal is made and seconded, it is then open to debate prior to taking the vote. That wasn't what I wanted to say. I must say I agree with Mr. Ellis that the question of access to the paddock is a total red herring. I think Councillor Levitt's point's the one we should be considering. Is this actual development as proposed acceptable in planning terms because of the proximity to the existing properties? I would be grateful actually if somebody could get up again the plan of the site so we can have a look at it. But in principle, I think that is the issue which we should be considering, and access to the paddock is an irrelevance.
Okay, Councillor Mantle. Is that possible? We can have the plan of the site back up, Hilary, or?
Chairman, would you like me just to
Mark, can you do that? Sorry,
things, Chairman.
Yes,
yes, Simon. Yes, we could talk through.
Just to explain, the blue land is the paddock land, and whilst there are gates shown from the 2 houses into the paddock, the 2 plots 1 and plot 2. Oh, yes. If members were minded to grant planning permission, because the red line is the development, you're not granting planning permission for the change of use of the paddock to garden land. So let's just say some boundary treatment was removed and all of a sudden you started seeing the lawns being mowed and the paddock was being mowed and there was what the phrase is domestic paraphernalia appearing in the paddock, then that would be a change of use. That would be an unauthorised change of use. So to go to that length, there would need to be another planning application for the use of the land as of the paddock as a garden. So what we'd expect to see is that the character and appearance of the paddock remains as such, even if there is access to it from those 2 private properties. And just drawing on some of the points that Councillor Levitt was making, the only inference I was comparing to was the height of buildings. Councillor Levitt's right in that the siting of the dwellings is further forward on plots 1 and 2 than was shown on the previous scheme, because there was sort of a row of houses at the back, and it ate into a little bit of green belt on that aspect behind at the back of the site. So yeah, I was probably being a bit too blunt when I said everything else is the same as the previous scheme. What I was trying to refer to was the height and overall massing of development is broadly the same, but of course the location of each plot is different. And you're right, they're closer to the property to the north of the site. But the officer's view, if you look at the report, is that we think in terms of amenity and aspect and outlook, we're comfortable that this is an acceptable form of development and that there isn't going to be any demonstrable loss of amenity to the surrounding occupiers. Okay.
Thank you.
Excuse me, is there any way I could jump in at this point and just make a clarification on the access to the paddock?
Not normally, would it be very quick?
The concerns raised by the parish council was about the maintenance of the grass within that paddock. So the applicant has suggested the potential for access through the gardens to allow maintenance of that land. If councillors would prefer that to have no access, the applicant would be equally happy to do so. But that is private land, so there would be no ability for public access.
Okay.
Thank you.
If I may share, that's a very useful clarification, but again, allowing a right for someone to go and maintain the paddock isn't really your area. It's not really the local planning authority's remit. You know, you're just granting planning permission for development or not. You're not really getting involved in the nitty-gritty of who's got a right to go down there and sort of access the paddock, particularly if it's not a public access.
Okay, Simon, thank you. With that, then I've got no other hands raised. Councillor Mantle, unless you want to speak again, is that your hand still up? No. In that case, I think we should move. There's no other hands requesting to speak. Should we move to the vote? Matthew, can you conduct the vote for us?
Sure, Chair. Okay, members. So can I ask you to use the hand function to vote for the recommendation? That's to grant planning permission. Please use the hand symbol. Okay, so I have Mike Hewson, Morgan Derbyshire, Councillor Ian Mantle, Councillor Sean Prendergast, Councillor Ruth Brown, Councillor Terry Tyler, Councillor Val Bryant, Councillor Mike Rice, Councillor Daniel Allen, Councillor Tony Hunter, Councillor Sunan Gwala. Okay, that's all for the four. May I ask any members to use the hand function for the against the motion? Okay, so I have Councillor Levitt.
Councillor Val.
I have Councillor Weeks. Okay, that's all I have for against the motion to grant. And finally, any members to abstain? Okay, I have none showing. So the motion to grant planning permission has been carried.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank you.
Can I ask Councillor Moody to turn his camera back on and his microphone when he needs to? We move on to item 7. Councillor Clafidia, Gosmore Road, Hitchin, Hertfordshire, SG4 9BE, erection of 6-bed, 4-bed and 2 5-bed dwellings, including creation of new vehicle access off Hitchin Road, following demolition of existing dwelling, revisions of a provision scheme granted under previous documentation. May I ask Tom Rea to present this item and any updates? Tom Ray, sorry, I keep saying Rea. Apologies. Tom?
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes.
Good, thank you. Good evening, members.
Good evening.
By way of updates for this particular item, the applicant has submitted a further document in connection with contamination issues. This is a remediation method statement. This has been requested by the Council's Environmental Health Officer, and condition 17 in the agenda report deals with contamination matters, and it is recommended that the wording of that condition is slightly altered to include reference to this submitted method statement. So therefore the condition should read, the development hereby approved shall be carried out in accordance with the Phase 2 Geo-Environmental Site Investigation Report, September 2018, and the submitted remediation method statement, May 2020, by BRD Environmental Limited. Now I would like to go on to the slides, Chair.
Okay.
First slide, please. So this is the location of the site on the southern edge of Hitchin, just south of the junction of Newlands Lane and Hitchin Road. The site is over 1/2 hectare. About 1/3 of the site is currently designated as greenbelt land, with the greenbelt boundary running in a diagonal line from the current access point to the southeast corner of the site. The remainder of the site is within the urban area. Next slide, please. Apologies for the poor quality of this photograph. However, it shows the central area of the site looking from the access point. The original house and garage has now been demolished and all the material has been cleared from the site. The greenbelt boundary is not defined on the site. Next slide, please. This slide shows the southern boundary of the site, which is defined by a continuous row of conifer trees. This is the proposed revised greenbelt boundary in the emerging local plan. Next slide, please. Again, this is the southern boundary with a more extended view. Next slide, please. This slide shows the site entrance looking north towards Newlands Lane. This is to be moved further south to improve visibility for the development. Next slide, please. This slide shows the elevations of the pair of semi-detached dwellings on the site, plots 2 and 3. All of the houses will be of a traditional gabled roof design with facing brickwork, timber cladding, pan tiles and chimneys, etc. Next slide, please. This is an example of one of the detached dwellings. This is plot 5 at the rear of the site. Next slide, please. This slide shows the approved layout for the site, granted planning permission in 2018. The main change will be in the central part of the site, where plots 2 and 5, as you see on that plan, will be increased from 2 to 4 dwellings. Next slide, please. This is the proposed layout for the site for this application. The access point and the central service road and the plots at the front and rear of the site are essentially in the same position as the approved scheme. A refuse vehicle can enter and leave this site in forward gear. There are at least 33 parking spaces to be provided on the site, including visitor spaces. All of the garages meet the minimum size requirement of 3 meters by 7 meters, as measured internally, and they all indicate the provision of cycle and scooter storage and electric vehicle charging points. All of the gardens exceed by some measure the recommended amenity area required by Policy 57. Next slide, please. This is a landscaping plan for the site, and it includes full details of the hard and soft landscaping materials and plants for the site. The southern boundary trees are to be removed and a new hedgerow planted together with additional specimen trees. Next slide, please. Slide shows the elevation and plan details for plot 6. Next slide, please. And finally, the details for plot 7. So just to summarise for members, as I mentioned at the beginning of the report, there was a previous application on this site for 6 dwellings. This permission has established the principle of a cul-de-sac development on the site. The applicants wish to increase the number of units to 8 dwellings to allow the scheme to be more receptive to the current housing market. The benefit of this scheme is that it allows a greater mix of units, introducing 2 semi-detached units with only a small percentage increase in floor space, as I've mentioned in paragraph 4.3.8. In addition, the scheme will deliver 2 more units, which assists the council further in its housing supply position. In terms of impact on the surrounding area, the development will be of a similar low density scheme as nearby housing, as I've mentioned in paragraph 4.37. And a key advantage of this proposal over the approved 6-unit scheme is that officers have managed to negotiate with the applicant to make a contribution towards education provision and a sum of money towards a footpath or footpath improvement facility in the vicinity of the site. So therefore, Chairman, we would ask the committee to support the recommendation subject to the unilateral undertaking and the conditions are set out. Thank you, and that completes my presentation.
Thank you, Tom. We do not have any registered speakers for this particular item, but I'd like to open up the floor for any questions for Tom from the committee members. Councillor Mike Hewson.
Sorry if I've missed this. Who's the applicant? It's blank on the agenda item.
Tom?
Just bear with me a second, Chairman. I'll just It's a company called Peter David Homes.
Thanks.
Is that all you need to know, Councillor Hewson? Is there any more questions?
For now, yeah.
I've got no other hands raised. Is anybody else would like to speak? Oh, Councillor Levitt.
Move the recommendation, Chairman.
Okay, we have a seconder.
Happy to second.
Fabulous. Thank you, Daniel. Then in that case, I'll hand over to Matthew to take the vote.
Thank you, Chair. And as before, members, please use the hand function to cast your vote. So this is for the recommendation to grant planning permission. We have Councillor Tyler, Councillor Michael Weeks, Councillor Sean Prendergast, Councillor Val Bryant, Councillor David Levitt, Councillor Daniel Allen, Councillor Ian Mantle, Councillor Tony Hunter, Councillor Ian Moody, and Councillor Ruth Brown. Thank you. Is that everybody who's casted for? May I now ask members to use the vote hand function to vote against the motion to grant planning permission. Okay, have none coming up. Okay, and any abstentions? Okay, that's fine. That vote has been carried. So the grant planning permission has been carried.
Thank you, Matthew. That's it's been granted with all 19 conditions listed. Moving on to item 8, 40 Daiquiri Road, Hitchin, Hertfordshire, SG5 1QJ. Variation to condition 2, insertion of front dormer windows of planning permission 1900249 FP granted on the 2nd of the 4th 2019 for erection of 1 terraced and 3 2-bedroom dwellings following demolition of existing bungalow as amended by the plan numbers PL02E and PL02D. May I ask Tom Ray to present this item, please, with any updates he has. Thank you.
Thank you again, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep. Thank you. Chairman, as you can see from the reason for referral on page 73, this application is on the agenda tonight as it has been called in by Councillor Albert. In terms of updates, Chair, I just have one item. Members may have been circulated a letter from the applicant's agents, BBR Architects, who make the following points in support of the application. I'll just run through those. Firstly, they say there are several examples of front-facing dormers in the area, including at numbers 59 to 60 Dacre Road, and also dormer windows on the Albert pub. Other properties nearby also have rear dormers. The agents say that dormers are similar in width to the other Dacre Road windows, and that at numbers 41 to 50 Radcliffe Road, behind this site, is a terrace with front-facing dormers, as well as dormers at numbers 5, 12 and 16. They say there are further examples of dormers in the wider area, and that dormers are therefore not out of keeping with the character appearance of the surrounding area. The applicants refer to the point that this application relates only to the dormers, and the objection on parking grounds cannot be relevant given the previous approval whereby permission was granted for the 3 dwellings without any parking. So if I could just move to the slides, please. Slide 1, please. So this slide shows the application site located in Dacre Road, close to the junction with Nightingale Road. Previously on the site, there was a detached chalet bungalow and garage. The site has a rear access leading to Radcliffe Road. This part of Dacre Road has no special designation. It is outside the Hitchin Conservation Area. It's also outside the Hitchin Article 4 area, and there are no listed buildings nearby. There is a controlled parking zone which operates in Dacre Road at present. Next slide, please. This slide shows the construction of the approved building for the site. It's a terrace of 3 2-bedroom dwellings. Next slide. This slide shows the properties further down Dacre Road and helps to illustrate, I think, to members the variation in scale and design of the dwellings in the road, including in this particular photograph, dormer windows on numbers 59 and number 70. They're very similar in design to the dormers proposed in this application. Next slide, please. This is a further view of the road with the development site on the left. Next slide. And as I mentioned, this is the Albert pub at the top end of Dacre Road. Again, another example of a flat-roofed dormer facing the road. Next slide, please. This is the site as it is today, substantially complete now with the roof on and the approved roof lights inserted on the front-facing roof slope. Next slide, please. This slide shows the houses in the adjoining Radcliffe Road, which has been referred to by the applicant's agent. And here again, more examples of roof dormers facing the highway. Next slide, please. This slide shows the block plan for the site and illustrates that the proposed dormers are smaller on the front elevation than the approved dormers on the rear facing Rousselot. An additional on-street parking space is being provided following the demolition of the original chalet, which had a driveway. Next slide, please. This slide shows the elevations and floor plans for the dwellings. One can see here that the proposed dormers are well contained within the roof slope and would not result in an overly obtrusive or incongruous feature in the street scene, in my opinion. So just to summarise, Chairman, planning permission has already been granted for this terrace of 3 dwellings with no parking. Development is virtually complete now, and the existing planning permission is a significant material consideration, in my opinion. The only issue with this Section 73 application can be the consideration of the design and appearance of the front dormers and the impact on neighbours. And I've addressed these concerns in the agenda report and concluded that the dormers would not, taking into account the surrounding built environment, have any significant or demonstrable harm that would warrant the refusal of planning permission, in my opinion. And therefore, Chairman, I would ask the committee to support the recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. I think he declared that Councillor Ian Albert called this one in. Did he declare why?
Yes, he was concerned at the design and scale of the dormers and the lack of parking.
Okay. Right. Do we have any questions for Tom from the committee? Councillor Levitt?
Thank you, Chairman. Could just this isn't in the conservation area, is it? If they were built without the dormers and somebody wanted to put them in afterwards, could they be done under? Could they just be done? Would they need permission?
Through you, Chair, can I answer that?
Yes, absolutely. Please do.
No, any dormers on the front-facing roof slope would require planning permission, conservation area or not.
Is that okay, Councillor Levitt?
Yes, thank you. In that case, Chairman, bearing in mind the fact that they look a lot better than those ones in Radcliffe Road, I'd move the recommendation.
All right. We have a number of other councillors that want to speak, though, so we're in the same position. So they had their hands up before you moved the motion as well, so we get to hear them, don't we?
Chair, do we have a seconder?
It also needs to be seconded. It also needs to be seconded.
Yes, please, if we have a seconder for that. Yeah, but I will allow the others to speak.
Happy to second.
Councillor Allen seconded. Right. Well, Councillor Allen, you are one of the speakers. Is that what you wanted to say?
Yes.
All right. Okay, Councillor Allen. Councillor Brown.
I just wanted to ask the planning officer how many other dormers. I mean, there are clearly other examples of other front dormers, but so it's not unprecedented. But the predominant street view, street scene seems to me to not include front dormers. Is that correct? Can you give me any steer on that?
Tom?
Through you, Chair, yes. I mean, I have accepted that in the report, that the majority of dwellings do not have dormers, but as I've mentioned, there are some examples, yes. Thank you.
Is that okay, Ruth?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Bryant? Val? Oh, Val, anyway.
This is an area I know extremely well. And I think that to actually include information about Radcliffe Road is very misleading. Although they're actually parallel to each other, you can't actually see from one to the other. Even look at the whole of Dacre Road, this is a very long road. So the fact the pub might have a small dormer miles away will not actually make any difference. What we've got to look at is the actual local environment of the nearby houses. And in that area, in fact, there are only 2 other dormers. The whole of Dacre Road, there are only 2 other dormer windows. So this would actually double the number of houses with dormer windows. And although the impression is that the buildings in Dacre Road are all different. In many ways, there's a cohesion. They're all on the same brick, they're all the same era, etc. And when you walk down the road, and I did a site visit recently, the new dwellings just dwarf the old dwellings. This is what the residents are concerned about. And it is, I don't know if any of the other committee members have actually been and visited the site. It is something that's very apparent. So first of all, I suggest that we cannot take into account anything that's happening in Radcliffe Road at all. And secondly, we actually look at the actual environment in the immediate area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bryant. Would you like to respond, Tom? Is there any response for that?
I think Councillor Bryant said you can't take anything into account in Dacre Road at all. That would include then, logically speaking, the existing properties without roof dormers. As I mentioned in the report, there are some examples, but I've also admitted that there are a few examples, and the majority do have standard roofs. But my point is, the question is whether or not these particular dormers have a particular jarring impact in terms of the character and appearance of the area, and I've concluded, in my professional opinion, that they don't.
Thank you. Councillor Prendergast.
Thank you. I'm in full agreement with the planning officer. I don't think this makes a demonstrable difference whatsoever, and it would be extremely unreasonable to refuse planning permission on these grounds, and therefore I would like to go ahead to the vote and move the motion.
Thank you. We still have Councillor Weeks.
Sorry, yes. I've visited this street. I don't know it very well, but it's a right mix match of various properties, heights, composition and everything. The dormers will make no difference at all. They won't affect anyone. I'm happy to second the application to grant, Chairman.
Oh, it's already been seconded. Yes.
Okay.
I've still got Councillor Brown's hand up. Have you got one more statement or one more question?
I just wanted to support what Councillor Bryant was saying. I know this street very well, and I think the predominant street scene does not include dormers.
Oh, bugger.
So I think that there's no more hands up, and that's so we go back to the motion that this be granted with the 7 conditions for 40 Dacre Road. Can I ask Matt to take the vote, please?
Sure, thank you, Chair. So members, as before, please use the hand function to vote for the motion to grant. I have Michael Weeks, Councillor Morgan Derbyshire, Councillor Ian Mantle, Councillor Sean Prendergast, Councillor Sunan Gwala, Councillor Terry Tyler, Councillor David Levitt, Councillor Daniel Allen, Councillor Ian Moody, Councillor Mike Hewson, Councillor Tony Hunter, and Councillor Mike Rice. Okay. No against and no abstentions.
Councillor Bryant
Sorry.
and Councillor Brown is an abstention.
Sorry, say again, Mel.
I'm voting against. I haven't been given a chance yet.
Sorry, Councillor Brown. I'll get to that part. Sorry. Councillor, okay, so for the against, please raise your hand. Okay, Councillor Brown, Councillor Bryant. Okay, that's received. Any abstentions?
Councillor Brown, you still got your hand up.
Okay, that's carried. To grant has been carried.
Okay, that's been carried. Right, on to item 9, which is the 11 Common Rise, Hitchin, Hertfordshire, SG4OHL. 2-part story, single-part story front extension, 2-story rear extension, erection of a single garage off existing access from Cooks Way following the demolition of existing garage. Please, I invite Councillor Kay Tart to inform the committee that she'll be speaking as a member advocate on this and will not be taking part in the debate or the vote. Councillor
Yes.
Bryant.
Thank you, Terry. Yes, I am not sitting on the committee this evening, but I would like to speak as a member advocate, so I will not be taking part in the debate or the vote.
Thank you very much. May I ask Simon Ellis to give the presentation and also any updates that may have occurred?
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just go straight to the slides, please? Okay, next one then. So that's the site plan, 11 Common Rise, for the garage access onto Cooks Way, and then the house as it exists to the front. Can I have the next slide, please? So that's the view of the front of the house as it exists.
If you could speak up, Simon. You seem
That's
quite...
the view of the front of the house as it exists at the moment. Can I have the next slide, please?
Thank you.
That's a wider street scene view. You can see in the far right-hand side of that photograph is the house on the application site, and then the next door with the single-story front extension. Can I have the next slide, please? And that's looking in the other direction. Again, another single-story front extension on the neighbouring house on that side. Can I have the next slide, please? That's just a wider view of the street scene in both directions, in both sides. Sorry, can I have the next slide, please? And that's the existing garage onto Cooks Way that would be replaced if this were granted. And the next slide, please. And that's a view across the road from the application site. I think that's it for the slides. I don't normally do this, Chairman, but can we go on, please? So that's the red line. Here's the elevations. Keep going. Next slide, sorry. That's as existing. You can see that it's quite a small house compared to its neighbour that's been extended quite significantly at the moment. Can I have the next one, please? And here's the internal layout and the first floor plan and the ground floor plans. You can see that you'd have some quite extensive accommodation as a result of this development if it were to go ahead. Next slide, please. And then here's the elevations, the rear elevation. There you can see the significant extensions that would be added to the rear, and then the front extension there with the new gable facing to the front. That would be the two-story front extension also proposed. And the next slide, please. That's it for the slides. Just says I don't normally do this, but I'm just going to point. I think to sum up, really, it's best to look at paragraphs 5.310 and 5.311. I'm going to read them out. Actually, I don't normally do this because it just really sums up everything that the officers are concerned about. So the development proposed the erection of a single part two-story front extension, two-story rear extension, and a detached garage to the rear of the site. The single-story front extension, two-story rear extension, and detached garage have been previously approved under application reference 191894. So the bulk of the extensions here have already been approved. This application proposes an addition of a first floor front extension, which is considered a departure from the prevailing character of Common Rise, whilst it is noted that most properties along Common Rise feature single-story front extensions, and you can see some of those in the photographs of varying size and design. No property yet features a two-story front extension. Whilst the varying designs of single-story front extensions are considered, considering the limited single-story nature of the existing extensions along the street scene, the established character and appearance of properties within Common Rise remains predominant. A two-story front extension would have failed to remain subservient to the character and appearance of the host dwelling and would fail to be in keeping with the character of Common Rise. In addition to the above, the two-story front extension would set a precedent for the remaining properties along Common Rise that may result in the erosion of the established character of the street scene. So we've got one point of disagreement between us and the applicant, and we put that to the applicant. We said, can you just remove the first floor, two-story front extension, please, because we don't think that's right in this particular street scene. But he wants, the applicant, didn't want to agree that, so would like you to grant permission for this. But our view is that we think that sets a precedent, and we don't think that the first floor front extension is appropriate in this location. That's it for me. There's no further updates. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Simon. So the recommendation is to refuse this planning permission. Could I ask you to read out the 7.1 paragraph 1, the actual reasons why, just to restate it for everybody. It's only a paragraph.
Sure. Yeah. What I wanted to do, the reason I did read out 5.3.10, 5.3.1 is just to give you the exact concern we've got leading to the proposed reason for refusal, which is the proposed development by reason of its size, design and siting would result in an unacceptable harm upon the character of the area by reason of its failure to remain sympathetic to the scale, appearance and history of the locality. The proposal therefore failed to comply with policy 28 and 57 of the current local plan and policy D1 and D2 of the emerging local plan and section 12 of the National Planning Policy Framework.
Thank you, Simon. Do we have any questions for Simon? I've got two hands up. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chairman. It's more of a question about the report, actually. This is 11 Common Rise, correct?
Because don't we normally go to speakers first, or?
I just yes, yes. I just thought this, since we just had the presentation from it, it'd be quicker to.
Yes, it is Lemon Common Rise, yeah.
Yeah.
Because under the representations, under neighbouring notifications 4.1, there's also one from 11 Common Rise in support. That's a little bit unusual, is it not?
Simon? Have we lost Simon?
Yeah, well, that's completely unusual, because that would be the applicant making representation on their own planning application. I'm not quite sure what happened there. I wonder whether that's, I think you can take that as being either the applicant or a mistake. I'm sorry, I can't clarify that. I'd need to look into the background, so I apologise for that. But yeah, that should normally be embedded in the report, saying the applicant's points are these. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Simon. I'll just take one more question before we move on to registered speakers, and that be from Councillor Hunter.
Thank you, Chairman. Mine was just a point of order that we're drifting into debate and questions again when you've got the member advocate, etc., waiting in the wings that should have gone first.
Okay. With that, then we'll move on to registered speakers. Member advocate is Councillor Kay Tart to speak as a member advocate on this item. Kay, would you like to give the presentation? You have 5 minutes. You're still on mute, I think.
Yep. You're muted, Kay.
Sorry, thank you. Yes. I thought I'd done it, but I had not. Thank you, committee. Before I speak in support of this application, I would like to draw members' attention to a number of errors in the report that's been presented. Item 5.2.2 states that the proposed eave heights are 5.1 metres in height when they are actually 4.8 metres, as they are designed to be subservient to the existing building. It also states that the proposed elevation is 6.8 metres when it is actually 6.3 metres, and it further states that the proposed width is 4.4 metres when it is in fact only 4.2 metres. Given that the reasons for the recommendation for refusal do centre around the size, scale and subservience of the design, I believe it is of real importance that the correct numbers be presented to committee. I'm speaking in support obviously this evening because I believe that permission for this application should be granted. In the case officer's report, it states that the key issues for consideration are the acceptability of the design and its resultant impact on the character and appearance of the area, living conditions of neighbouring properties, and on car parking provision. A number of properties in Common Rise have been extended to varying degrees and in a number of different styles, as you've seen from Simon's pictures, including a number of first floor extensions to the side, which means that despite this proposed extension being unique in its design, it is not the first of its kind. There are a large number of ground floor front extensions, all varying in style, along with different porches and canopies, which means that there is no longer any consistency of design on this street. The homeowners have designed their proposed extension to be both considerate and sympathetic to neighbouring properties, considering the architectural details carefully, but also to be unique. This extension will not block their neighbours' light or obstruct their windows, and owing to its situation opposite a T-junction, proves to be no issue with regards to overlooking. The report further states that no property in Common Rise yet features a two-storey front extension, and that the proposed development would fail to remain subservient to the host dwelling. I would argue that the design proposed does remain, and in fact has been designed to remain subservient to the host dwelling, and that the fact that no property yet features a two-storey front extension, or that it might set a precedent, should not be grounds for refusal. If we never allowed applications that were the first of their kind, a number of excellent alterations and extensions would have been refused. We should be encouraging innovative design and supporting design proposals which make properties more accessible and more usable in the 21st century. This property, along with many others in Common Rise, has severe accessibility issues, including but not limited to the pitch of the stairs, which this design would address in an intelligent way. In fact, the NPPF paragraph 130 states that permission should be refused for development of poor design that fails to take the opportunities available for improving the character and quality of an area and the way it functions. Conversely, where the design of a development accords with clear expectations in plan policies, design should not be used by the decision maker as a valid reason to object. With this in mind, I believe that where a development of good design takes the opportunity to improve the character and quality of the area, for example, by removing side-facing windows and improving mobility access, that there should be good reason for approval. If other homeowners in Common Rise sought to extend their properties in a similar fashion, this would significantly improve both the appearance of the area and the functionality and accessibility of the properties, and I believe we ought to be encouraging this sort of design. Paragraph 131 of the NPPF states that in determining application, great weight should be given to outstanding or innovative designs which promote high levels of sustainability or help raise the standard of design more generally in an area, so long as they fit in with the overall form and layout of their surroundings. Finally, I would like to draw your attention to a discrepancy in the case report, in that it appears to directly contradict itself by suggesting that the proposed development both complies and fails to comply with the same policy of the emerging local plan, D1, which it does meet, and I believe it does comply with policy D2. Planning permission for house extensions will be granted where A, the extension is sympathetic to the existing house in height, form, proportions, window details and materials, and B, pitched roofs are used where appropriate, particularly if the extension is more than the height of a single storey. In conclusion, I believe that the recommendation for refusal of this application is very much weighted on design and character, which I do not believe should be used as the sole deciding factor in an application of this type and in this circumstance. And I disagree wholeheartedly with the suggestion that this design would not have a positive resultant impact on the character and appearance of the area. It meets both reasons, but there are other key issues for consideration. I sincerely hope that you will share my feelings with regards to this application and will grant permission for it this evening. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Tart. Do you have any questions for Councillor Tart? Excuse me. I have nothing. Oh, Councillor Mantle.
Eventually get the unmute working. Okay, could you confirm whether this half of the semi-detached building is as original or if it has previously had alterations?
I believe it's completely original. I have been inside it and seen it. And as far as I'm aware, it has been untouched, which is why it's so desperate in need of real modernisation. I think the pitch of the stairs is something ridiculous, like 49 degrees.
Okay. Councillor Allen.
Kate, you mentioned there that the measurements are different to the ones that we have in front of us. May I ask where you got the measurements from? And can I ask then if you can confirm their accuracy?
I was actually notified that the measurements that were on the report were inaccurate by the applicant themselves today, which is why I've brought it forward. So I can confirm that they are accurate as per the design submitted by the architect.
Okay. Any other councillors wish to question? No, in that case, thank you, Kay. Can I ask you to turn off your mic and camera when questioning? Thank you. Right, we have another a supporter. Please may I invite Mr. Adam Sapar to speak in support of this item.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, councillors, for hearing me this evening to discuss my home and the proposed extension. I would like to start by mentioning that less than 7% of UK housing stock is disabled friendly and accessible. This includes my home currently. My extension concentrates on ensuring better accessibility throughout the ground and first floor. This is something that North Herts planning policy proactively encourages under the Emerging Local Planning Policy, HS5. This proposal strives to improve these conditions for all people. From the case officer's report and building on my planning statement to the committee that Councillor Kate Hart has distributed to you all, I understand that the only controversial matter from the case officer's report is the front extension element at first floor. And so we'll concentrate my discussion with you around this. I must note that the case officer's report remains positive in relation to planning policy until the final conclusion, which results in the recommendation for refusal. There is positivity towards living conditions and car parking, as policy is indeed met in policy 28 and D3 and policy T2 of the emerging plan. It is also noted that no overlooking would be resulted in a front extension element as I am proposing. It is also noted within the case officer's report that the proposed development would be in compliance with both local and national planning policies. I would like to explain that without the minor addition to the home, many existing problems cannot be improved upon. I fundamentally believe that the reason for any development under planning policy should be to improve upon the existing conditions and enhancing character which are already in place. To echo Councillor Tart, the belief is supported by the National Planning Policy Framework, Chapter 12, Paragraph 130, whereby permission should be refused for development of poor design and fails to take opportunities for improving the character and quality of the area and the way it functions. It goes without saying that where opportunities are taken, a permission should be considered. One example of this proposal is to provide an improved solution to the stairs. The current stairs are exceedingly steep and dangerous and do not meet regulations and could not ever be modified to accept a stair lift, as none can be installed at a 49-degree pitch. Stair modifications and the resulting extension in question heavily relate to the current local plan policy 57, paragraph 4.11, which reads, the council considers that, on the whole, new buildings, including extensions and alteration, requires careful and thoughtful design for future generations. It goes on to say that, in pursuit of the aims of policy 1, relating to the council's intention, that development proposals should show the highest standards of layout and design. And yes, I believe we do both of these. Side-facing windows are another issue being designed out by this scheme. As I'm sure you will agree, side-facing windows would not be permissible within any new development or extension to date. The removal of these windows, by way of a front extension, are in direct response to emerging planning policy D3, which ensures no harm comes of living conditions to those living at the property or to their neighbours. Bedrooms on common rise typically overlook one another, meaning that it is very easy to look into those bedrooms, whether that be inadvertently or intentionally. These proposed plans ingeniously remove the unacceptable conditions by pulling the first floor forward slightly to encourage forward-facing windows to the habitable rooms. I do take the point that the front first floor element brings about change. Change is not to be discouraged in planning policy. Emerging policy D2 provides a short summary of conditions which are considered within an application. It is believed that the proposals relate and conform to current policy 57, guidelines 1 and 2, whereby the surroundings are taken into account and the proposal is carefully designed as to not be dominant on the street scene. I feel strongly that the improvement of the property is very valid, real and humanitarian reasons justifies a modest new street appearance. I feel that the case officer report does not reflect heavily enough, if at all, on the living conditions and habitability of the property, where clear indicators within Policy 1, Policy 57 and Emergency Policy D3 and within the MPPF Chapter 12. This application is led by a need for universal access into and throughout the property and the right to privacy and not fear of overlooking. We have 5 letters of support from neighbours and support from our local councillor, Councillor Tart. Lastly, I ask the committee to consider, can we also encourage improved accessibility for all people, including those who are less abled, to justify development? I would like to think that one day, can I finish? Just 2 more sentences.
2 more, Glenn.
Okay. I would like to think that one day planning policy might start to encourage and consider utilitarian and characteristic reasons for improving not only a property, but also the character of the area. And I hope you see fit the reasons to be in favour of our application. Thank you. Myself and Gareth would now be very happy to answer questions.
Yes, do we have any questions from our councillors, committee members? Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, Mr. Thapar. Bit of a late one now.
It is. I need coffee.
When you were in discussions with the planning officers about these extensions, did you mention the fact about it making more disabled friendly and being a home for life? Because I'm surprised there's no mention of that in the report, because actually I quite agree with what I used to live in a very similar house to that, very close by there, and my existing house is not. So I do understand the issues with that and people wishing to remain in a particular house and adapt the house to suit. I'm surprised this hasn't been mentioned previous to this.
So for our second application that we put in to do the front extension, there was no correspondence during that statutory period with the planning officers, unfortunately. We've raised it with our councillor, but there was no opportunity for that. So no, it probably won't appear in the report as there was no discussion had.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Sabo? You see no hands raised. So I'd just say thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you for your time. Thank you.
Right. Can I call upon Simon Ellis to respond to any issues that have been raised during this session?
Thank you, Chairman. No, just a couple of points, really. I mean, design's all about context, isn't it? It's not only about the size and scale of additions and the roof pitches and the heights and the exact scale of development. It's about context, and the planning officer's point here is that we think that a first floor extension in this context is inappropriate in the street scene, and that's reflected in the recommendation. And also, planning is not about internal layout either, so internal layout isn't something that we can control. So the configuration of rooms and staircases and things is an internal factor, so not really a planning factor. What we're concerned about is context, design, street scene, and as you know from most residential estates, this is quite a small house as the original size house, we've been told, and you quite often see lots of bolt on to houses at the back and all sorts of extensions creep out the back. That's because that's where it's less visible in the street scene. But once you start interfering with the front elevation of a property in a street like this, you could end up with all sorts of things coming along in the future. So that was our concern. And as I said at the beginning, our only point of disagreement with the applicant is the first floor front extension. Everything else has already been granted permission in the previous scheme, and that in itself is a significant addition to the level of accommodation on this site. And that's our view. So thank you.
Do you have any questions for Simon? Councillor Pendergast.
Yeah, just a quick question for Simon. Do you have any comments on discrepancies in the sizes that were raised by Councillor Tart?
Yeah, I mean, those discrepancies are quite minor, few centimetres here and there. Yeah, so I mean, the case officer's report isn't as accurate as maybe the applicant's exact measurements. But as I said earlier, design is all about context. It's not about the exact size of the extension and the exact roof ridge heights. It's about, this is a first floor extension on the front of the property. That isn't seen anywhere else in common rise, and we think this would set a precedent and harm the street scene.
Councillor Allen.
While I do have huge respect for our officers, I think on this occasion they're not right. The street scene along Common Rise, there's so much variation in the way the first floor extensions have been done. I really don't think there is a huge step forward or even step backwards by allowing a second story extension. You're right. To quote you, his design is all about context. To allow a change internally, you may have to change the design externally. And in this context, I think that I'm for this change.
Thank you. Councillor Mantle.
Thank you. I very much agree with what Councillor Allen has just said. I think from the planning point of view, what is important is the street scene. And from what I've seen of Common Rise, there are a whole variety of things which have been approved in the past, including in the house next door to the one subject to this application, which I think do anything but enhance the overall view of the street. You've got a street where all the houses are built together, they're built to match and so on, fine. But I don't think that's the case here. I think that so many alterations have been allowed in the past that the unity of the street scene has long since gone. And therefore, we should be looking at this application purely in terms of its size, dimensions, and its impact on the street scene. And personally, I think it would be an improvement over what's there at the moment.
Okay. Councillor Levitt.
Thank you, Chairman. I was going to say pretty much the same as Councillor Mantle and Councillor Allen have both said there, that if you go down that road, it is a bit of a higgledy-piggledy mismatch of designs and things. There's the extensions of yellow bricks, there's extensions made of wood, there's an extension that looks like it's made out of pallets further down the road. There is no street scene. At the risk of upsetting people who live there, it's not the nicest looking street in the area. And I think any of the thing that you do, and this design's quite a nice looking design. I'm sort of thinking back to the dormers in the last one, which is a little bit different to what we've got already. We've just approved that. I don't see any particular issues with this. I think the reasons behind doing it, although not on this real planning consideration, are worthwhile. And we do have in our own policies those about trying to keep people in their own homes, and some of the emerging policy that's coming out now, I know, is aimed at standardised design and making homes accessible. Therefore, to move things on a bit, I'm going to propose that we grant permission in this case.
Okay, do we have a seconder?
I second that.
Who was that? Who was that?
I second that.
Sorry, Sean. Right, well, we still got some.
Chairman, presumably that's with standard conditions that you would normally put on a householder permission, materials, development in accordance with the approved plans, just simple conditions along those lines. You'd probably get away with just the time limit condition, the materials condition, and then the development in accordance with the approved plans. I don't think there's anything else needed if members were minded to grant permission. So I would just add that you need to decide what conditions you want as well.
Yeah, standard conditions as the officer says.
Sorry, Chair.
To be approved, etc.
Who's that?
Sorry, Chair, it's Daniel. We haven't actually entered debate yet. We're still questioning. We're still questioning about what's going on to the officer. So it's great to say that we're going ahead, but we haven't actually come. Let's follow the rules of debate.
Well, we had a proposer and a seconder, and after Simon spoke, there are 3 other councillors that wish to speak. So what I do is I take those first, and then we already got, and then we have to go to the vote.
Do they wish to speak, or do they wish to ask a question of the officer?
I don't know. They've got the raised at hand, and what I can do is say that they wish to speak. So, Councillor Hewson.
Thanks, Chair. I I'm still in two minds about this, so I wouldn't mind seeing the photos again of the street, if they could be, if it would be possible, the street scene and then proposed plan as well. But you know, maybe we could hear some other questions while we wait for that to load up. Oh, it's quite big.
Okay. Councillor Weeks.
Councillor Weeks, you are not unmuted. You are still not unmuted.
Is that better?
You know.
You want to go back to the photographs?
Right, okay.
Please, yeah.
If you can get to the beginning of the photographs, I think I can see which the best one will be. So yeah, go back a bit. Oh no. Okay, is that the big? So the next slide then, that's the front of the house as it exists. And the next one, that's the street scene view looking down. There's the house on the application site on the far right. So you can see the street scene in that direction. If you take a look at the next photograph, looking in the other direction, and I think there's a wider view coming up as well. If you just move on there, there's what we're talking about, adding a first floor or two-story front extension to that house. We think would harm the street scene, but that's our view.
Can I see the proposed design? Sorry.
So that's as existing, and then that's the garage plus the floor plans. Next slide. That's the rear elevation, and then the front elevation is there, and then that south elevation. So you can see the two-story element, and then if you look at the block plan, you can see the two-story gable coming forward with the roof on the front as well there.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah. I've still got Councillor Mantle. The hand raised.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm sorry, I thought we had actually moved to the debate part, and I apologise if Councillor Allen thought we were still asking questions. But I was going to say that I think that what Mr. Ellis has suggested by way of conditions, if we do proceed to a motion as proposed, those would be the appropriate conditions to attach to it.
That's great. Yeah, I agree too. They're standard conditions, I think we called it, didn't we? Or Simon called it. Councillor Weeks.
Yes, as I was saying earlier, Chairman, I don't have a problem with this application, and the report itself acknowledges that the development does not result in any unacceptable overbearing, and yet we have this recommendation. Not that it's a planning consideration, but a majority of the close neighbours are in favour of it as well, Chairman. I will be voting against this recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Hewson, you still got your hand up. You still wish to speak?
No. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm trying to get rid of it.
So we have a proposal and a second for granting this permission with standard reasons.
Standard conditions.
Sorry, Neretta? Neretta, what was that?
If I may, Chair, she just reminded you that it's conditions, not reasons. So you're looking at a 3-year time limit, development in accordance with the approved plans, and final details of materials, and then that's all you need, I think.
And just to make sure I don't get this wrong, then, because that was proposed and seconded to grant this permission with standard conditions, we should take the vote for that first, or we could. Neretta?
Sorry, yes, that that's the only motion that's been put forward and has been proposed and seconded. So yes, you vote on that.
Okay, so we're going to take a vote on to grant this with standard conditions. Matt, if I can ask you to conduct the vote, please.
Sure, members. Thank you, Chair. So if you'd like to use the hand function again to vote to grant. So this is for Councillor Prendergast, Councillor Hunter, Councillor Brown, Councillor Rice, Councillor Bryant, Councillor Weeks, Councillor Allen, Councillor Mantle, Councillor Levitt, Councillor Tyler, Councillor Moody, Councillor Nguala, Councillor Houston, and Councillor Derbyshire. Okay, that's carried.
Okay, that's, because that was carried, we don't have we don't have to consider the recommendation motion.
No,
Sure.
because it's not been put forward by anyone or seconded.
Okay, so it wasn't motioned, it wasn't seconded.
Yeah.
Okay, then in that case, we grant permission for this development with standard conditions as proposed by Simon. Item 10 of 11, 3 Limekiln Lane, Baldock, Hertfordshire, SG7 6PG, extension of existing rear dormer and insertion of a new window to the first floor bedroom to the rear. Can I ask Simon to give a presentation, any updates on this particular development? Simon?
Simon, you're mute.
Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. Thank you, Chairman. No, I don't have any updates. Can I just go straight to the slides, please?
Of course.
Okay, next slide. That's the application site, 3 Limekiln Lane, Baldock. Next slide, please. That's the rear elevation as existing. Next slide, please. Another one. And the next one, please. That's the site plan. Next slide, please. And drawings as existing. Next slide, please. And filling in the other side for the dormer there, that's the proposal. And this, next slide, are there any more? And that's the internal floor plan as a result of the development. Next slide, please. Again, loft space. Next slide. That's it. So this is only really on the agenda as a technicality. It's a lawful development certificate, which confirms that that is permitted development. And the only reason this is on the agenda is because the applicant is one of my team. So he's just looking to put a dormer on his house and we couldn't determine it under delegated powers. So that's the updates. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. There are no registered speakers for this item. Therefore, I moved to debate, which could include questions for Simon if you had wished to. Councillor Weeks.
Unmute yourself, please, Councillor Weeks.
Chairman, move the recommendation.
We have a seconder.
I'm happy to second.
There are other speakers who wish to speak. Should I be taking those views before we go to vote?
Yes.
Okay. Councillor Brown.
I was going to move the recommendation.
Great. Councillor Allen.
just to point out that it was the same as the house next door. Definitely happy with the recommendation.
Okay, and Councillor Rice. Oh, Councillor Rice is gone, so he must have been doing the same thing. Okay, and then I can. Could I ask that we're voting to grant this application, and could I ask Matt to take us through the voting process, please?
Sure. Okay, members, and as before, please use the hand function to vote for that lawful development certificate be granted. Okay, Councillor Prendergast, Councillor Derbyshire, Councillor Mantle, Councillor Bryant, Councillor Moody, Councillor Rice, Councillor Brown, Councillor Nguala, Councillor Hunter, Councillor Allen, Councillor Hewson, Councillor Tyler, Councillor Weeks, and Councillor Levitt. And that's carried, that's unanimous.
Thank you, Matt. That one's carried. So we move on to item 11. Glebefield, Liddy Bottom, Liddy, Luton, Hertfordshire, LU2 8NH, two-storey side extension, porch and carport, following demolition of existing storey side extension. Can I ask Tom Ray to give his presentation and any updates on this particular application?
Hello, Chair, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. There are no updates on this particular item, so if I could go straight to the slides, please. First slide, please. This slide shows the location of the dwelling at Glebefield. It's sited alongside Lodge Cottages off Lily Bottom. There are no other dwellings nearby. The area is washed over by the Greenbelt designation in the local plan. Next slide, please. This is the rear elevation of Glebefield. A single-storey addition was added prior to the full conversion of the building to a dwelling. Other than that, the size of the building is as originally constructed as a two-storey garage with storage above. Next slide, please. This slide shows the front elevation of the dwelling with the parking area accessed off the right of way. Next slide, please. This slide shows the side of the dwelling where the proposed extension and carport will be constructed. Next slide, please. This is a view of the house and Lodge Cottages taken from the right of way. Next slide, please. And this is the front elevation of the dwelling. Next, please. And this is the site plan showing the location of the dwelling in relation to Lodge Cottages. Next, please. And this is the block plan showing the location of the extensions relative to the dwelling. Next, please. These are the existing elevations and floor plans. The dwelling currently has 3 bedrooms. Next, please. And this is the proposed elevations and floor plans. The ground floor of the extension would largely replace the existing gym, and a new bedroom is added at first floor level. The extension would be set back from the front elevation, and it has a slightly lower roof than the main roof, and materials would match existing. That's all, Chairman. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tom. We have no registered speakers for this item, so we'll move to debate. I've got Councillor Allen.
Sorry, my hand must have still been up from last time.
Oh, no problem. Councillor Hewson. Oh, no, both gone. Councillor Derbyshire. No, Councillor Derbyshire's gone. There doesn't seem to be any hands up at all. Is that correct, officers?
That's correct, Chair.
Therefore, if there's no debate, then I'd actually move that we grant this planning permission. If I have a seconder.
Yeah.
Oh, happy to second.
Who was first there?
Don't mind.
Don't mind.
Are we going
Councillor
to?
Brown, Chair.
I put my hand up.
That's Councillor Brown's seconded then. Okay, Matthew, if I could take you, if you could take us through the vote, please.
Sure, Chair. Thank you. Okay, to grant the plan permission, please use the hand function now. Okay, Councillor Prendergast, Councillor Weeks, Councillor Derbyshire, Councillor Moody, Councillor Mantle, Councillor Brown, Councillor Hunter, Councillor Tyler, Councillor Levitt, Councillor Bryant, Councillor Rice, Councillor Hewson, Councillor Nguala. Okay, that's everybody else carried, Chair. Sorry, apologies. I don't have Councillor Allen. Sorry,
I'm refusing to abstain.
You'd like to abstain? Okay, thank you.
So we Matthew, we had the vote for. Was there one against and then abstain? Did I?
There was no against, Chair.
Oh, no against. Okay, and one abstention.
One abstention from Councillor Allen.
Okay, so that's granted with the three conditions that are outlined. Now, in that case, we're moving on to appeals. Could I ask Simon to give us a presentation on the planning appeals?
Thank you, Chairman. No updates. The appeals are set out in the report. I'll take any questions.
Do we have any questions for Simon on appeals? I can see no hands raised.
No,
with that,
no hand away.
I confirm there's no hands raised. Okay. In that case, I'd like to thank everybody because this concludes our planning committee marathon for the evening. And thank you very much for all your time and to our speakers as well. Matthew, if you can confirm that the audio recording of the live stream will now cease and the time of ending is 23:15 of the meeting.
I can confirm that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, officers.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you,
everybody.
everyone.
Officers. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.